The captain of a Qatari fishing trawler sailing early in the morning to the port of Doha spotted an uncontrolled motorboat on the open sea. Upon approaching, the crew discovered two women on board. One of them, later identified as an Indonesian citizen, was dead from extensive blood loss caused by a wound that experts later identified as the result of a hunting arrow. The second, an Egyptian citizen, was in a state of deep shock and severe dehydration. This discovery, recorded by the Coast Guard, became the starting point for an investigation that the Qatari authorities subsequently tried to conclude without publicity. To understand how these women ended up 80 kilometers from the coast, it is necessary to reconstruct the events that preceded their discovery. At the center of this story is 28-year-old Yasmin, an Egyptian citizen who arrived in Doha on a work visa. Like thousands of other women from Southeast Asia, Africa, and Arab countries, she worked as a domestic servant. Her contract with a cleaning agency in Doha provided her with an income of $600 per month. This was a standard salary for such a position, but for Yasmin, it was critical. She sent almost all of her earnings to her family in Cairo. The money went to support her sick mother, who needed expensive kidney surgery, and to support her 3 younger sisters, who were receiving an education. Yasmin worked without days off, taking extra shifts and saving rigorously. Her life in Doha was a closed cycle, working in the homes of wealthy Qataris, sleeping briefly in a shared room with other workers, and making weekly phone calls home. The agency's management described her as an efficient and unobtrusive employee. It was these qualities that apparently attracted attention to her when the agency received an unusual request. One day, the agency manager called Yasmin to the office. She was offered what they called a special project. The job was temporary, for only 3 days. The client was a high-ranking official whose name was not disclosed. The place of work was a private area where transportation would be provided. The nature of the work was described vaguely. Assistance in preparing for a private event, serving guests. The pay for 3 days of work was set at $5,000. This amount was almost 10 times her annual salary. The agency manager emphasized that the offer required absolute confidentiality and an immediate decision. Yasmin was aware of the risks associated with working at closed private events, about which there were various rumors among the servants. However, the $5,000 would fully cover the cost of her mother's surgery and subsequent rehabilitation. After a moment's thought, she agreed. She was instructed to sign additional non-disclosure documents, the text of which was written in English, a language Yasmin knew only at a basic level. She was not given a copy. The next day, an unmarked car picked Yasmin up from the agency's dormitory. She was taken to a small private airfield outside Doha. There, she met 3 other women who had also been hired for this job. They were girls about her age, one from the Philippines, one from Indonesia, and one from Kenya. They kept to themselves, and it was clear that they had also been instructed not to make unnecessary contact. They were loaded onto a helicopter. The flight lasted about an hour. Yasmin, looking out the window, saw the coastline of Qatar disappear, replaced by the uniform blue surface of the Persian Gulf. The island where the helicopter landed was small, no more than 4 square kilometers, according to estimates. It was densely covered with jungle-like vegetation and palm trees. On the shore, near a small pier, stood the only modern villa, built of glass and concrete. A man who introduced himself as the manager met them at the landing site. He was a man with a stern face, of Pakistani origin, who spoke clear English. He immediately took the women's passports and mobile phones, explaining that this was a security requirement and registration procedure on private property. When Yasmin tried to clarify when her documents would be returned, the manager replied that all questions would be answered at the end of the day. The women were taken to a separate guest house adjacent to the main villa. The rooms were luxurious, with panoramic windows overlooking the ocean. The manager informed them of the rules. Prince Nasser, the owner of the island, who was 42 at the time, would arrive tomorrow. Today was meant to be a day of rest. They were forbidden to leave the guest house or approach the main villa or the pier without an escort. In the evening, they were brought dinner. The women ate in silence. The tension between them was growing. They found themselves completely isolated, 80 kilometers from the mainland, without documents, without communication, on an island belonging to a man they had never seen. Yasmin's attempts to talk to the others were unsuccessful. They were frightened and clearly did not want to break the established rules. Towards evening, Yasmin was left alone in her room. She looked around the room. In the closet, in addition to a bathrobe, she found a neatly folded set of dark-colored sportswear and a pair of new sneakers that fit her perfectly. The same clothes, as she later learned, had been prepared for the others. This was the last detail she remembered before falling asleep, exhausted from the flight and nervous tension. At around 3 a.m., Yasmin and the other women were awakened by a loud noise, which Yasmin later identified in her testimony as the sound of gunshots fired in the immediate vicinity of the guest house. These were not single shots. According to her testimony, it was a short but intense burst of gunfire, presumably from automatic weapons, fired into the air. Almost immediately afterwards, the doors to their rooms were forced open. Several people burst into the rooms. According to Yasmin, they were the same guards who had greeted them upon arrival. But now their faces were hidden by tactical masks, and they were armed with automatic weapons. They did not say a word, using only sharp gestures. The guards pointed to the sportswear and sneakers that Yasmin had previously noticed in the closet. They were ordered to change immediately. The state of shock and disorientation prevented the women from resisting or asking questions. They were led out of the rooms, their hands roughly tied behind their backs with plastic ties. The women were led along a dimly lit path from the guest house deep into the island, into the thick of the jungle. After about 15 minutes of walking, they came to a clearing lit by several powerful spotlights powered by a generator. A man was waiting for them in the center of the clearing. It was 42-year-old Prince Nasser. He was dressed in expensive camouflage clothing used by professional hunters. In his hands, he held a modern composite hunting bow, and a large knife was secured in a tactical sheath on his hip. The Pakistani manager who had met them on arrival stood next to him, acting as an interpreter, although the prince apparently understood English. Prince Nasser looked at the women. His gaze, as described by Yasmin, was devoid of any emotion. Then he began to speak. His tone was calm and businesslike, as if he were instructing staff before the start of a routine event. The manager translated his words. The prince explained the rules. He called what was happening a survival game. He said he would give them exactly 30 minutes head start. After that, he would begin the hunt. Their task was to hide and survive on the island. He reminded them that the island was surrounded by water and that the nearest shore was 80 kilometers away, making any attempt to escape by swimming impossible. The prince specified that the game would last 12 hours. However, he also set a key condition. If at least one of them survived until 6 in the morning, i.e. until dawn, she would be declared the winner. The winner, according to him, would immediately receive her freedom and a reward of $100,000. He did not specify what would happen to those he caught before that time. According to Yasmin, the women were in a state of shock. The Kenyan woman began to cry quietly, but the manager ordered her to be quiet with a sharp gesture. Prince Nasser gave a sign, and one of the guards cut the ties on the women's hands. "Run," he said. The women scattered in different directions, into the darkness of the jungle, away from the lit clearing. Yasmin, who had been a track and field athlete in Cairo during her school years and had good stamina, ran without looking back. Her first thought was to reach the shore. She instinctively believed that she would have a better chance of finding shelter, or perhaps a way to leave the island near the water. At that moment, she did not fully realize the distance to the mainland that the prince had mentioned. The jungle was dense and unfamiliar. She pushed through the undergrowth, trying to move as quietly as possible. but her own breathing seemed deafening to her. After what Yasmin estimated to be about an hour, although in her state of panic her perception of time was severely impaired, she heard the first scream. It was a distinct female scream, full of terror, coming from the side of the island where, as she recalled, the Kenyan woman had run. The scream was loud, piercing, and abruptly cut off. Yasmin froze, pressing herself to the ground and hiding in the thick roots of a large tree. She tried to suppress her panic. Fear gave way to a cold, clear understanding. This was not a game or some form of cruel staging. This was reality. Prince Nasser was indeed hunting them, and he was armed. Yasmin continued moving, but now much more slowly, listening to every rustle. She decided to move parallel to the coastline, but remain under the dense cover of the trees. The humid night air made it difficult to breathe. She navigated by the sound of the surf, which was barely audible through the thick foliage. She realized that the hunter was probably using night vision goggles, which made her completely vulnerable in the dark. She tried to choose routes where the foliage was denser, avoiding open glades. After what seemed like another 2 hours, a second scream rang out. It was much closer than the first. Yasmin recognized the Filipino woman's voice. The scream was short, followed by a sound like a struggle or a body falling, and then complete silence. Now there were only 2 of them left. Yasmin lay down on the ground, covering her mouth with her hands so as not to make a sound. She lay there until she was sure there was no immediate danger. Realizing that passive waiting in the jungle would lead to inevitable discovery, Yasmin began to move cautiously deeper into the island, away from the shore, where she assumed the hunter might be waiting for her. She moved almost blindly, stumbling over roots and branches. During one of these stops, she almost collided with another figure. It was the Indonesian woman whom Yasmin remembered from their brief conversation in the helicopter, named Sari. Sari was just as frightened, but unlike Yasmin, she was barefoot. She had lost her sneakers while crossing a small swampy area. The women communicated in whispers. Sari was on the verge of hysterics, but Yasmin managed to calm her down, explaining that noise would attract attention. They realized that their only chance was to join forces. Moving together was more dangerous in terms of noise, but it gave them a psychological advantage. They discussed the situation. Yasmin suggested that the prince would not expect them to go to the villa where the guards were stationed. But Sari had a different idea. She pointed out that the villa was the only place on the island with means of communication. If they managed to sneak into the house unnoticed, they could find a radio room or satellite phone and call for help. It was a desperate plan. The villa was the prince's headquarters, and there were sure to be armed guards there. However, the alternative was to wait passively in the jungle until a hunter with a bow found them. They decided to take the risk. According to their calculations, there were no more than 2 hours left before dawn. That is, before 6 in the morning. They had no time to hide any longer. They began to slowly make their way towards the villa, guided by the dim lights of the service buildings visible through the trees. According to Yasmin's estimate, it took them over an hour to reach the villa. They moved slowly, using the thick shadows, running from one hiding place to another. Time was running out. The clock on the wall in the guest house, which Yasmin remembered, showed that dawn would break at around 6 in the morning. According to their calculations, it must have been around 4:30 in the morning. All their hope was that the prince, having caught 2 victims, might stop actively hunting until morning, or that the guards, confident in the island's isolation, had relaxed their vigilance. The villa seemed to be plunged into darkness, except for a few dim service lights around the perimeter. The main living areas with panoramic windows were dark. The women circled the building, looking for a point of entry. They discovered that the door leading to the kitchen from the courtyard was unlocked. This could have been either an oversight on the part of the staff, or, more likely, part of a deliberate plan. They had no choice but to take the risk. Once inside, they found themselves in a large kitchen equipped with the latest technology. Everything was made of stainless steel and stone. They moved cautiously, trying not to make any noise. From the kitchen, they entered the main hall of the villa. Moonlight streaming through the glass walls created deceptive lighting. They passed a bar counter stocked with expensive drinks. Their goal was the radio room or the manager's office, where communication equipment might be located. They found a door that appeared to lead to a service corridor. At the end of the corridor was a room with electronic equipment. It was a radio room equipped with satellite communications. The equipment looked complicated, but the main transmitter had a standard red button with the International Distress Signal, SOS. Yasmin, who had taken basic courses in office technology in Egypt, understood that activating this signal might be their only chance. Sari stayed by the door, watching the corridor, while Yasmin approached the console. She pressed the button. Nothing happened for a few seconds, but then a green light came on the panel, confirming that the signal had been transmitted. At that moment, there was a click from the speaker in the corner of the room, followed by the calm voice of Prince Nasser. He spoke in English. He congratulated them on making it to the final. At that moment, a bright light flashed in the hallway and in the wheelhouse itself. The women were blinded. Prince Nasser stood in the doorway. He was calm, holding the same hunting bow, but this time with an arrow nocked. He was not alone. The Pakistani manager stood behind him, blocking the exit. The prince slowly raised his bow. He was not aiming at Yasmin, who was standing at the console, but at Sari, who was frozen in the doorway. Sari screamed, but did not have time to move. The prince released the bowstring. There was almost no sound of the shot, just a dry click and a whistle. The arrow with a hunting tip entered Sari's thigh deeply, a few centimeters from the femoral artery. Sari collapsed to the floor, her scream turning into a moan. Dark blood immediately began to soak through her sweatpants and spread across the light-colored floor of the hallway. Yasmin, seeing this, reacted instinctively. She was no longer a victim paralyzed by fear. She acted out of desperation. Without thinking, she turned to the bar counter, which was a few steps away from the radio room in the main hall. The prince, obviously enjoying the moment, was slowly turning toward her, perhaps to reload his bow, or simply to speak. Yasmin grabbed a heavy, full bottle of whiskey from the bar counter. With all the strength she could muster, she hurled it at the prince. She aimed for his head. The bottle struck Nasser in the temple. There was a dull thud and the sound of breaking glass. The prince made no sound. He simply collapsed to the floor like a mannequin and lay motionless, briefly losing consciousness. The manager, standing behind him, was momentarily taken aback, not expecting such aggression. That moment was enough for Yasmin. She rushed to Sari. The Indonesian woman was conscious but in pain shock. "Run," Sari whispered. But Yasmin refused to leave her. She grabbed Sari under the armpits and dragged her across the floor, leaving a wide trail of blood behind her. The manager came to his senses and shouted, apparently calling for security, who, Yasmin assumed, were sleeping in another wing of the villa. Yasmin dragged Sari across the main hall to the glass doors leading to the pier. She didn't weigh much, but for the exhausted Yasmin, it was an almost impossible task. She pulled her onto the wooden deck of the pier. Several boats were moored at the dock, including the one that was apparently supposed to be used for the morning's fishing or sea trip, a small but powerful motorboat. Yasmin dragged Sari to the side and, with superhuman effort, lifted her inside. She jumped in after her. In desperation, she looked at the control panel. To her utter amazement, and perhaps as another detail of the prince's diabolical plan or simple negligence on the part of the staff, the key was in the ignition. Yasmin had never driven a boat in her life. She turned the key. The engine roared to life, breaking the silence of the night. Shouts came from the villa. Security guards ran out to the pier. Yasmin desperately pulled the lever she assumed was responsible for movement. The boat lurched forward, hitting the dock, but broke free into open water. Yasmin steered the bow away from the island, into the darkness of the open sea. Almost immediately, she heard the roar of a second, more powerful engine. The guards were starting up a pursuit boat. The race for survival continued on the water. Yasmin had no idea how to navigate. She simply steered the boat straight ahead, while Sari moaned and bled on the floor of the boat. Yasmin tried to steer with one hand and hold Sari's wound with the other, but it was useless. There was blood everywhere. The chase continued in the pre-dawn darkness. The security boat was faster, but Yasmin maneuvered desperately, albeit clumsily. Dawn was breaking. The sky in the east turned gray, and in that first light, Yasmin saw a silhouette. It was not the security boat, which had fallen behind for a while, but a large vessel. It was a Qatari fishing trawler heading for the port of Doha. The captain of the vessel, as he later reported to the Coast Guard, noticed a small boat moving erratically with 2 women on board. When the trawler got closer, the crew saw a scene they couldn't explain. One woman, covered in blood, was lying unconscious, while the other, severely dehydrated, was trying to get their attention before she lost consciousness herself. The fishermen pulled both women on board. The trawler's crew immediately administered first aid, using their onboard medical kit. But Sari's injuries were too severe. The captain contacted the Qatar Coast Guard by radio, reporting an emergency situation, the discovery of 2 injured women on the open sea. He was ordered to proceed to the port of Doha at maximum speed and was informed that an ambulance crew and the police would be waiting for them at the port. Upon arrival in Doha, the pier was already cordoned off by security personnel. The medical team immediately transferred both women to ambulances. Sari, who was unconscious, was rushed to the operating room at Hamad Main Hospital. Yasmin, who was in a state of deep psychological shock and physical exhaustion, was also hospitalized. An hour after arriving at the hospital, Sari died on the operating table. According to the doctor's conclusion, death was caused by irreversible blood loss and hemorrhagic shock due to a ruptured femoral artery. Initially, the police who arrived at the hospital treated the incident as a possible pirate attack or a failed attempt at illegal migration. However, as soon as Yasmin was able to speak, her testimony radically changed the course of the investigation. She gave a detailed, albeit rambling due to shock, account of the events of the previous 12 hours. The job offer, the helicopter flight, the arrival on the private island, the confiscation of her documents, the sportswear in the wardrobes, and finally, the night hunt organized by Prince Nasser. She described the deaths of the Kenyan and Filipino women, the trap at the villa, and Sari's injury. At first, the police were skeptical of her story, perhaps mistaking it for the ravings of a traumatized person. However, the physical evidence was undeniable. Sari's wound had been inflicted not by a firearm or a conventional cold weapon, but by a specific hunting spearhead, which had been removed during surgery. In addition, Yasmin gave the exact name, Prince Nasser, a member of one of the influential branches of the ruling family. This name immediately elevated the level of the investigation. The case was transferred from the port police to the State Security Service. Based on Yasmin's testimony and physical evidence, Sari's dead body, a decision was made to conduct an immediate operation on the island, which was quickly identified by air traffic control as the private property of Prince Nasser. A special operations unit of the Coast Guard was sent to the island. What they found fully corroborated Yasmin's words. Prince Nasser, his manager, and several security guards were on the island. The prince had visible signs of trauma to his head, presumably from being struck with a bottle. While searching the island, in the area Yasmin had indicated as the place where she heard the screams, the task force discovered 2 fresh graves. The graves were shallow, dug in haste. They contained the bodies of 2 other women, a Filipino and a Kenyan. A forensic examination conducted later determined that both women had died from multiple stab wounds, presumably inflicted with a large hunting knife. Traces of blood matching Sari's blood type were found in the villa, as well as broken glass from an expensive whiskey bottle. Prince Nasser and all the staff on the island were arrested and taken to Doha for questioning. The incident involving a member of the royal family, 3 murdered foreign nationals, and 1 surviving witness had the potential to escalate into a major international scandal. However, further events unfolded according to a different scenario. Prince Nasser was taken into custody. A team of high-profile lawyers immediately got involved in the case. Their defense strategy was announced almost immediately. According to their version, what happened on the island was not murder. They claimed that the women had been hired to participate in an extreme role-playing game with elements of survival. The lawyers provided contracts allegedly signed by all 4 women, including Yasmin and Sari. These documents, written in English, described the risks in detail, including the possibility of injury, and specified a reward of $100,000 for successfully completing the game. The lawyers insisted that all the women participated voluntarily, lured by the large sum of money. The death, they said, was a tragic accident, the result of a failure to follow safety rules during the game. The investigation also faced difficulties in gathering direct evidence against the prince. The murder weapon, the knife used to kill the Kenyan and Filipino women, was never found. The bow that wounded Sari, according to the defense, was loaded with a special humane arrow with a blunt tip for role-playing games, and the fatal wound was the result of an accident and Sari's fall. Yasmin's testimony was the only direct accusation, but she was an interested party, and the defense insisted that she had violated the terms of her contract and was now trying to avoid responsibility for the tragedy. 3 days after his arrest, Prince Nasser was released from custody due to a lack of direct evidence linking him to the actual commission of the murders. The manager took responsibility for insufficient security arrangements for the event. As for Yasmin, her position quickly changed from that of a witness to that of a problem. She was in the hospital under guard, effectively in isolation. Neither representatives of the Egyptian embassy nor journalists were allowed to visit her. A few days after the prince's release, she was visited by people who did not introduce themselves, but were acting on behalf of the authorities. She was made an offer she could not refuse. She would be paid compensation in the amount of $500,000. In return, she had to leave Qatar immediately and return to Egypt. She was also made to understand in no uncertain terms that the safety of her family in Cairo, her mother and 3 sisters, depended directly on her complete silence. Any attempt to contact the media or human rights organizations would have fatal consequences for her loved ones. Deprived of her passport, phone, and any support, Yasmin was forced to agree. She was deported from Qatar on the same day, put on a private flight to Cairo. The money was transferred to an anonymous account. The story of the hunt on the island never received widespread publicity. The Qatari authorities classified the incident as an accident that occurred on private property. The families of the deceased Filipino and Kenyan women were also paid substantial compensation through their recruitment agencies, which ensured their silence. The case was officially closed. Before his death from cancer, a 68-year-old Saudi billionaire forced his 4 wives to spend 30 days on a deserted island in survival conditions, where the winner would receive his entire inheritance of $3.2 billion, while the other 3 women died of starvation, murder, and accidents under the watchful eye of hidden cameras. Saleh ibn Muhammad al-Qahtani built his fortune in the petrochemical industry over 40 years of work. He started with a small oil refinery in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia in the late 1970s. By 2025, his corporation owned 3 large factories, shares in 2 oil fields, and a logistics network throughout the Persian Gulf. His personal fortune was estimated at $3.2 billion. Saleh had 4 wives in accordance with Islamic law. Fatima was his first wife, whom he married at the age of 23. She was 17 at the time. The marriage was arranged by their families, as is customary in conservative Saudi circles. Fatima bore him 5 children, 4 sons and 1 daughter. The eldest son is now 32, and the youngest daughter is 24. His second wife, Layla, joined the family when Saleh was 38. She was 12 years younger than Fatima. She gave birth to 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. Saleh married her after his business began to grow rapidly, and he had enough money to support several households. Fatima perceived the arrival of a second wife as a betrayal, but she had no right to object. According to the law, a husband could take up to 4 wives if he provided for them all equally. The third wife, Amira, was 6 years younger than the second. Saleh married her at the age of 51. By that time, he was very wealthy, owned villas in different cities, and often traveled abroad on business. Amira gave birth to 2 children, both now under the age of 10. She was educated, graduated from university, and worked as a teacher before her marriage. Saleh forbade her to work after the wedding. His fourth wife, Zainab, was Moroccan. Saleh met her during a business trip to Casablanca 5 years ago. She was 24 years old and worked at the hotel where he was staying. Saleh was captivated by her youth and beauty. He proposed marriage a month after they met. He brought her to Saudi Arabia. Zainab did not bear children, which caused Saleh's dissatisfaction and contempt from his other wives. All 4 women lived separately. Each had her own villa with servants and security. Saleh visited them in turn, spending several days in each house. Formally, he provided for all of them equally: money for household expenses, clothing, and personal expenses. But informally, there was a strict hierarchy among the wives. Fatima considered herself the leader as the first wife and mother of most of the children. Layla was dissatisfied with her second position. Amira felt like a third-rate wife. Zainab was considered an outsider by everyone else. Saleh was a cruel man. He beat his wives for the slightest misdemeanors. He could hit Fatima for undersalting the soup. He pushed Layla so hard that she broke her arm when she tried to argue with him. He beat Amira with a leather belt for talking to the gardener without permission. He humiliated Zainab in public in front of guests, calling her barren and useless. The women endured. Leaving him meant losing everything: their children, their money, their status. Divorce was shameful in their society, and Saleh would never grant a divorce willingly. They all waited for him to die. No one said it out loud, but every one of them thought it. Saleh knew it. He saw the hatred in their eyes when he thought they weren't looking. He heard Fatima praying for his death when she thought he was asleep. He found Layla's correspondence with her friend, where she wrote that she couldn't stand another year with this monster. He understood that Amira looked at him with disgust. He noticed the relief in Zainab's eyes when he left. In early 2024, Saleh felt weakness and pain in his right side. He went to the doctors. The diagnosis was stage 4 liver cancer, metastasis in the lymph nodes and bones. The prognosis was 6 months to live, a year at most. The doctors suggested chemotherapy, but the chances of remission were close to 0. Saleh refused treatment. He decided to face death like a man, without trying to cling to life. He didn't tell anyone about the diagnosis. He continued to live his normal life. He visited his wives' homes, spent time with his children, and ran his business. The pain grew worse with each passing month, but he endured it, secretly taking painkillers. By the summer of 2025, he could no longer hide his illness. He had lost 20 kilograms, his skin had turned yellow, and he was constantly weak. His wives noticed the changes but didn't ask any questions. Secretly, each of them hoped that he was seriously ill. The children also saw that their father was changing, but Saleh dismissed their questions. He said that he was just tired from work and needed a rest. In July, he called his lawyer. He said he wanted to revise his will. The lawyer came to the villa with the documents. Saleh explained that he wanted to create an unusual will. He didn't want to simply divide his property equally between his wives and children, as prescribed by Sharia law. He wanted something different. The lawyer listened attentively and took notes, but when Saleh finished, he said that such a will could be challenged in court. Saleh replied that he would make sure that everything was legally flawless. He asked for a document to be drawn up, taking into account all the necessary formalities. The will was ready in 2 weeks. Saleh signed it in the presence of 3 witnesses, as required by law. He recorded a video message explaining his wishes. He gave the lawyer a sealed envelope with instructions to be followed after his death. The lawyer was not allowed to open the envelope until that moment. In early September, Saleh's condition deteriorated sharply. He could no longer walk and spent his days in bed. He called all his children and said goodbye to each of them. He gave his eldest sons his final instructions on how to run the business. He told his daughters to be obedient wives. He did not meet with his wives. He refused to see them. On September 15, 2025, Saleh ibn Muhammad al-Qahtani died in his bed at the age of 68. His body was washed and buried the same day, according to Islamic customs. Hundreds of people attended the funeral: relatives, business partners, friends. The 4 wives stood apart, dressed in black abayas, their faces covered. None of them cried. 2 days after the funeral, the lawyer invited the 4 wives to his office in Riyadh to read the will. The women arrived with hope. Each expected to receive her share of the inheritance and finally be free. In the office conference room, they were seated in a row. The lawyer turned on the projector. Saleh's face appeared on the screen. The video had been recorded a week before his death. Saleh looked exhausted, but he spoke clearly. He began by saying that he knew his wives hated him. He said he had always understood this. He had seen how they were waiting for him to die. Now they had got what they wanted. He was dead. But they would not get the money as they had expected. Saleh explained that his entire fortune would be transferred to only one of his 4 wives. The one who proves that she deserves it more than the others. The rest will get nothing. He will now explain how the winner will be determined. A map of a small island appeared on the screen. Saleh explained that this was his private island in the Red Sea, which he had bought 10 years ago. It covered an area of 8 square kilometers. The island was uninhabited, covered with rocks and sparse vegetation. There was a source of fresh water. There were no buildings and no connection to the mainland. The 4 wives would be taken to this island. Each will be dropped off at different points. Each will receive a minimum survival kit. They will spend 30 days there. The goal is simple: survive. After 30 days, a helicopter will come for them. The one who is alive and able to board the helicopter will receive the entire inheritance. $3.2 billion. All the villas, yachts, corporation shares, everything. If anyone refuses to participate, all the property will go to a charitable foundation that Saleh created specifically for this purpose. None of the wives and children will receive a cent. The lawyer read out the relevant clause of the will, certified by a notary and a religious judge. Saleh smiled on the screen. He said it was his last gift to his wives, a chance to prove their strength. All their lives they had been weak, enduring his will. Now let them show what they were capable of. Let them fight for what they considered theirs. The video ended. The conference room was silent. Fatima was the first to speak. She said it was madness, that the will was illegal, that her sons would challenge it in court. The lawyer calmly replied that the will had been drawn up in accordance with all the rules of Sharia and civil law. Saleh had the right to dispose of his property as he saw fit. Participation in the test was voluntary, but refusal meant losing the inheritance. Layla asked what exactly they were supposed to do on the island. Just sit and wait for 30 days. The lawyer replied that the rules were simple. Survive by any means necessary. There were no restrictions except those imposed by nature. There was enough food for 3 days. After that, everyone had to fend for themselves. Amira asked what would happen if someone was injured or fell ill. The lawyer said that medical evacuation was only possible in the event of an immediate threat to life. In such a case, The evacuated person would automatically be removed from the trial. Surveillance cameras will be installed on the island to broadcast what is happening in real time. A team of doctors on the mainland will monitor the women's condition. If a critical situation arises, they will decide on evacuation. Zainab asked who would be watching the recordings. The lawyer replied that Saleh had left a list of 50 people. These were his close friends, business partners, people he trusted. They would have access to the closed broadcast as a final gift from Saleh, a kind of private show for the select few. The women exchanged glances. Each of them understood that there was no choice. Refusing meant being left with nothing. Without Saleh's money, they were nobodies. Fatima was too old to start life over. Layla was accustomed to luxury and could not imagine life without it. Amira thought about her children, who needed an education and a future. Zainab was young, but she had no profession and no connections in a foreign country. The lawyer took out 4 copies of a document: consent to participate in the experiment. The document stated that each woman voluntarily accepted the terms of the will, understood the risks, and waived any claims to the estate in case of failure. The document had to be signed in the presence of witnesses. Fatima was the first to pick up the pen. She signed quickly without reading the text. Layla and Amira followed her. Zainab hesitated the longest. She looked at the text, then at the lawyer, then at the other women. Finally, she signed too. The lawyer said that the flight to the island would take place in 3 days. The women needed to prepare. Take a minimum of personal belongings: warm clothes for the nights, comfortable shoes, no phones, no means of communication. Everything they needed for the first few days would be provided on site. On September 18th, at 6 in the morning, black SUVs pulled up to each villa. The drivers silently loaded the women's small bags into the trunks. Fatima left the house wearing a long black abaya and hijab. Her 2 older sons accompanied her. They asked their mother not to go, saying they would contest the will and find another way. Fatima shook her head. She said this was her last chance to get what she deserved after 30 years of humiliation. Layla was accompanied only by her eldest daughter. They hugged silently by the car. Her daughter cried, but Layla remained calm. She said she would be back in a month and everything would be fine, that they would finally be free and rich. Amira said goodbye to her 2 young sons. The children did not understand where their mother was going and why she was leaving for so long. She told them she was going on a trip and would be back soon with gifts. Zainab left alone. No one came to see her off. She considered her sisters-in-law to be enemies. She had no children and no relatives in the country either. Cars took the women to a private airport on the outskirts of Riyadh. A helicopter was waiting for them there. The pilot checked their documents and helped them board. There were 4 seats inside. The women sat down silently, not looking at each other. The helicopter took off and headed west, toward the Red Sea coast. The flight lasted 2 hours. Below, the desert floated by, then mountains, then blue water. The island appeared on the horizon around 8 in the morning. A small piece of land covered with gray rocks and sparse shrubs. No beaches, only rocky shores. The helicopter began to descend. Fatima was the first to be dropped off at the northern tip of the island. The pilot pointed to a flat area between the rocks. The helicopter hovered a meter above the ground. The co-pilot handed Fatima her backpack and helped her down. As soon as she touched the ground, the helicopter took off and flew away. Fatima was left alone. She looked around. There were only rocks, thorny bushes, and the endless sea. She opened her backpack. Inside were 3-liter bottles of water, 6 cans of food, a pack of crackers, a box of matches, a folding knife, a 10-meter length of rope, and a simple 3-by-3-meter canvas tarp. That was all. It should be enough for the first few days. After that, she would have to find food and water on her own. Next, they dropped Layla off on the west coast. Her backpack had the same contents. The helicopter flew away, leaving her on a narrow strip of land between the sea and a sheer cliff. Layla looked at the cliff. It was 20 meters high. Birds were crying from above. She picked up her backpack and began to look for a way up. Amir was dropped off on the east side. The place was more gentle, with sparse vegetation. She saw a small grove of low trees in the distance. She decided to go there to find some shade. Zainab was dropped off last, at the southern tip. It was the rockiest and most deserted place. She sat down on the ground and cried as soon as the helicopter disappeared from view. During the first day, the women settled in. Fatima found a natural cave in the cliff. It was small but protected from the wind and sun. She stretched a tarp over the entrance, creating additional shade. She drank half a bottle of water and ate a can of food. She began to make plans. She needed to find the water source that Saleh had mentioned. Without water, they would not survive 30 days. Layla climbed to the top of the cliff. From there, she could see the whole island. She saw the central part where trees grew. That meant there was water there. She decided to go there in the morning. For now, she set up camp at the top, stretching the awning between the rocks. She ate some crackers and drank some water. She lay down to sleep on the bare rocks, wrapped in the awning. Amir reached the grove. It was cooler there. The ground was damp. She poked it with a stick and found moisture half a meter deep. That meant water was close. She began digging with her hands, deepening the hole. An hour later, she came across wet sand. The water wasn't gushing, but it was seeping slowly. That was enough. She stretched the tarp over the hole so the water wouldn't evaporate. She ate a can of food and lay down to rest. Zainab spent the entire first day in a panic. She had never been alone in such conditions. She grew up in the city, surrounded by people her whole life. She lived in a luxurious villa with servants for 5 years in Saudi Arabia. She didn't know how to cook or how to get food. She cried until evening. Then she drank the whole bottle of water at once and ate 2 cans of food. She fell asleep on the ground without even putting up the tarp. On the second day, they began to move. Fatima went in search of water. She walked along the shore to the south, carefully examining the area. After 3 hours, she found the bed of a dry stream. She walked up the slope. The stream led to a small depression in the rock where rainwater had collected. There wasn't much water, but it was clean. Fatima filled 2 empty bottles and returned to the cave. Layla climbed down from the rock and headed towards the center of the island. On the way, she found edible plants that she had seen in her childhood village. She picked a few and chewed them. They were bitter, but not poisonous. She reached the grove where Amira was. She saw footprints, freshly dug earth, and a stretched tent. She realized that one of the other women had already found water. She did not approach closely. She went on, looking for her own source. Amir heard footsteps and froze. She peeked out from behind a tree and saw Layla 200 meters away. Layla also noticed her. The women looked at each other for a few seconds. Then Layla turned and walked on. Both understood that direct conflict was not necessary yet, each on her own. The meeting would take place later. Zainab woke up on the 3rd day with a headache from dehydration. The water had run out yesterday. There was only enough food left for 1 day. She forced herself to get up and start moving. She walked along the shore to the north, not knowing where she was going. 2 hours later, she came to the place where Fatima had been dropped off. She saw a cave and a tent, but Fatima herself was not there. Zainab came closer. In the cave lay a backpack with leftover food and a bottle of water. She grabbed the bottle and drank half of it in 1 gulp. She took a can of food and hid it in her pocket. She heard footsteps and turned around. Fatima was standing 10 meters away, holding a fist-sized rock in her hand. Her face was calm, but her eyes were hard. She asked what Zainab was doing in her camp. Zainab backed away and mumbled that she was just looking for water. She didn't want to take anything. Fatima stepped forward. She said that Zainab had always been a thief. She stole the place of the fourth wife, even though she was unworthy of it. She stole Saleh's money for her own whims. Now she was stealing her food. Zainab tried to explain, but Fatima threw a stone. It hit her shoulder. Zainab cried out in pain, turned around, and ran away. Fatima did not pursue her. She returned to the cave and checked the supplies. One can of food was missing. Half of the water had been drunk. Bad. She had to be more careful. The other women were already looking for resources and would start attacking. It was time to prepare for defense. By the end of the first week, everyone's food supplies were gone. The real stage of survival had begun. Fatima used her childhood experience in a Bedouin family. She remembered how her grandfather taught her to find edible roots in the desert. She dug the ground near dry plants, found thick roots, and boiled them in a tin can over a fire. She caught lizards basking on rocks. She killed them with a stone and roasted them over the fire. The taste was disgusting, but it was food. Layla found a colony of crabs in the coastal rocks. She hunted them at night when they crawled out. She caught them with her hands, broke their shells with stones, and ate the raw meat. It made her nauseous, but her body accepted the food. She found shellfish stuck to underwater rocks. She collected seaweed and dried it in the sun. She made a kind of soup by boiling everything in a can. Amira made a spear out of a long branch and a sharpened stone tied with a rope. She stood for hours in shallow water, tracking fish. She caught her first one only on the fourth day of trying. It was a small fish, about 50 grams. She ate it whole, bones and guts included. Gradually, she learned to aim more accurately. Sometimes she brought back 2 or 3 fish a day. That was better than the others. Zainab didn't know how to do anything. She tried to eat any plants she could find and got poisoned on the 3rd day after her supplies ran out. She vomited for a day. She lost a lot of fluid. She became weak. She found a bird's nest on the ground, broke the eggs, and drank the contents. It was enough for a day. Then she was hungry again. She began to lose weight quickly. Her body was burning from the inside. On the 8th day, Zainab decided that she would not survive alone. She needed an alliance. She went to look for Amira because she seemed to be the youngest and most agreeable. She found her by the water with a spear. She approached her with her hands up, showing that she was unarmed. Amira was wary, but she didn't run away. Zainab suggested they join forces. She said that together they would be stronger. They could share resources and help each other. And when 30 days had passed, they would divide the inheritance in half, 600 million each. It was fair. Both would survive. Both would be rich. Amira listened silently. Then she asked how Zainab imagined the division. The will was clear. The winner gets everything. The inheritance cannot be divided if both are still alive. Zainab insisted that they would find a way. They would write an agreement after they returned. They would force the lawyers to comply. They would have power and money. Amira thought about it. The proposal was reasonable. It was hard to survive alone. It was easier together. There was more food and better protection. They would see what happened. She agreed. They joined forces. Amira showed Zainab where to find water and taught her how to fish with a spear. Zainab gathered plants and seaweed. They shared everything equally. They didn't talk much and didn't trust each other, but the partnership worked. After 3 days, Zainab regained her strength. She no longer looked like she was dying. Amira also felt better with company. Fatima and Layla acted alone. Fatima reinforced her cave by stacking stones in front of the entrance. She created a makeshift wall. She hunted lizards and fed on roots. She lost weight slowly, but her experience helped. Layla moved the camp to a hilltop from where she could see the whole island. She watched the movements of the others. She saw Zainab and Amira walking together. She realized that they had formed an alliance. This changed the situation. 2 against 1 was worse than each on her own. On the 16th day, The first serious incident occurred. Zainab and Amira decided to find a seabird nest. They saw birds flying over the cliffs in the northwest. That meant there were nests with eggs there. They set off early in the morning. They found a colony on a sheer cliff above the sea. The nests were on ledges 20 meters above the water. Amir said she could climb up. The rock was uneven, with many protrusions. Zainab stayed below to belay her. Amir began her ascent. She climbed slowly, checking each foothold. After 10 minutes, she reached the first nest. There were 3 eggs inside. She put them in a makeshift bag made from a t-shirt tied to her belt. She climbed to the next nest, higher up. Zainab watched from below. Birds circled overhead, crying anxiously. Amira reached the second nest and took 2 more eggs. She began to descend. At a height of 15 meters, her foot slipped off the wet rock. Amira lost her balance, tried to grab hold, but didn't make it in time. She fell backwards. The impact with the rocks was dull. Amira lay motionless. Zainab ran up and knelt down beside her. Amir was breathing, but couldn't move. Her eyes were open, staring at the sky. She whispered that she couldn't feel her legs. Her back hurt so much that she wanted to scream. She asked Zainab to call for evacuation. There are cameras on the island. The medics can see her. Let them send a helicopter. Zainab looked at her silently for 30 seconds. Amira asked for help again. Zainab slowly got up. She looked at the eggs in Amira's bag. She bent down, untied her t-shirt, and took out 5 eggs. She put them in her pocket. Then she took Amira's knife out of its sheath on her belt. She took the bottle of water that was lying nearby. Amira understood. She screamed, begged her not to leave. Zainab turned and walked away. Amira's screams could be heard for a long time, then faded away. Zainab walked quickly, without looking back. All she could think about was that now she had food for several days, and one less competitor. Amir lay on the rocks for 4 hours. The pain was unbearable. She tried to scream, to call for help, but her voice quickly weakened. By evening, she began to experience internal shock from her injuries. Her body temperature dropped. Her breathing became shallow. Cameras on the island recorded her condition. Doctors on the mainland saw the critical indicators. But they did not send a helicopter. The rules were clear: evacuation only in the event of a direct threat to life. Amira was still breathing, so the threat was not immediate. By nightfall, the internal bleeding had intensified. Amir lost consciousness. Her breathing stopped around midnight on the 16th day. Her body remained lying on the rocks. Birds began to circle lower, but did not dare to descend. The next morning, doctors reported her death. But they did not take the body. It had to remain on the island. Those were the conditions. Zainab returned to camp with 5 eggs and Amira's extra supplies. She ate 2 eggs right away and hid the rest. She knew that Fatima and Layla had not seen what had happened. The cameras had seen it, but the women on the island did not know about it. Zainab decided to keep Amira's death a secret. Let the others think there were still 4 of them. On the 17th day, Layla descended from the hill to the water source in the grove. She hadn't seen Amira for several days, which was strange. She usually came to the water every morning. Layla looked around Amira's camp. The tent was still there, but almost nothing was left. The water hole was untouched. Strange. Layla walked along the coast, looking for traces. An hour later, she stumbled upon a body. Amira was lying on her back between the rocks, her arms spread out to the sides. Her eyes were open, staring at the sky. The body had already begun to decompose in the heat. The smell was strong. Layla came closer and examined it. A broken spine was evident from the unnatural position of the body. She had fallen from a cliff, an accident, or someone had pushed her. Layla looked up. Birds' nests were visible on the ledges, so Amira had climbed up to get the eggs and fallen. But where was Zainab? They had been working together for the last few days. Layla returned to Amira's camp and carefully examined the tracks. Two sets of footprints led to the rocks. One set led back. So Zainab had been there, had seen the fall, and had left, abandoning her partner. Now there were 3 of them left. 13 days to go. Layla realized that the time for alliances was over. The final phase was beginning. Someone had to die so that the others could survive. She returned to her camp and began to prepare. Fatima learned of Amira's death the next day when she passed by the body. She stopped for a moment, looked at it, and said a prayer for the deceased. Then she moved on. Death was inevitable in these conditions. Fatima knew this from day one. Saleh had created a game where only one would survive. Prayers would not help. Only strength mattered. Zainab kept her distance from the others. She hid the leftover eggs and conserved water. Her weight continued to drop, but she was alive. That was the main thing. 12 more days. She had to hold on. She had to avoid Fatima and Layla. They were stronger and more experienced. She had no chance in a direct confrontation. On the 20th day, the second death occurred. Layla decided it was time to act. Passive waiting was no longer working. There was almost no food left, and their strength was fading. Fatima was the oldest, but she was holding up well. Zainab was young, but weak after being poisoned. She was a logical target. Layla tracked Zainab down at the water source. She waited in the bushes until evening. When Zainab came to fetch water, Layla came out of hiding. Zainab turned around, saw her, and backed away. Layla walked slowly, without rushing. She said she knew about Amira. She knew that Zainab had left her to die. Now it was Zainab's turn to pay. Zainab tried to run away, but Layla was faster. She caught up with her, grabbed her by the hair, and threw her to the ground. Zainab screamed, scratched, and tried to break free. Layla was 15 years older, but a month of survival had made her tough. Her hands wrapped around Zainab's neck and squeezed. Zainab gasped, tried to push her away, kicked her legs. The forces were unequal. Layla strangled her until she lost consciousness. When Zainab's body went limp, she dragged her to the spring. She lowered her face into the water and held it there. She counted in her mind. 60 seconds. 120. 180. The body twitched several times, then fell completely still. Layla held on for another minute to be sure. Then she let go and stepped back. Zainab lay face down in the water, her arms outstretched. Dead. Layla returned to the camp. Her hands were shaking. She had killed a person, strangled her with her bare hands. The feeling was strange. Not pity, not horror, just emptiness, and the realization that only Fatima was left. 10 days to go. One of them would die. The other would get everything. Fatima found Zainab's body on the morning of the 21st day. She pulled it out of the water and laid it on the shore. The marks on her neck were clear. Strangulation. Layla. So, the open hunt had begun. Fatima returned to the cave and reinforced the entrance with stones. She took the largest stone she could lift. She sharpened the edge of a piece of silicon, creating something resembling a knife. Now all she had to do was wait. For the next 8 days, the women avoided each other. Layla remained on the hill, watching the island. Fatima sat in the cave, leaving only to get water and food. Both were starving. There were fewer lizards. They had gone into hiding. The fish had gone deeper. The plants had been eaten. Their bodies were burning from within, consuming their last reserves. On the 28th day, Layla realized that it was time to end it. 2 more days and the helicopter would arrive. If both of them were alive, what would happen? The will did not provide for such a scenario. She had to act now. She went downstairs at night. She knew where Fatima's cave was. She approached quietly and listened. She could hear breathing inside. Fatima was asleep. Layla began to move the stones at the entrance. Fatima woke up to the sound. She jumped out with a stone in her hand. She saw Layla in the dark. A fight began. Both were exhausted, but adrenaline gave them strength. Fatima swung the stone. Layla dodged. She hit Fatima in the stomach, and she doubled over. Layla tried to knock her down, but Fatima hit her in the face with her elbow. Layla fell, blood gushing from her broken lip. Fatima threw herself on top of her and pinned her to the ground. Layla was 9 years younger. She was stronger. She rolled Fatima over and ended up on top. Her hands groped for her neck. Fatima grabbed her hair, pulled it, and scratched her face. Layla squeezed her throat with all her might. Fatima gasped, choking. Her blows weakened. Her eyes rolled back. When Fatima fell silent, Layla did not let go immediately. She held on for a long time. She remembered that Zainab had twitched after losing consciousness. She had to make sure. She sat on Fatima's chest, choking her until her hands went numb. Then she got up. Fatima lay motionless, dead. Layla went to the water and washed her face. Blood dripped into the spring. She returned to her camp. She lay down on the ground. She did not sleep until morning. She thought about what she had done. 3 women were dead. She had killed 2 with her own hands. She was the only one left. In 2 days, the helicopter would arrive. She had won. The 29th day passed in anticipation. Layla hardly moved. Her strength was running out. She drank water, nothing else. She hadn't eaten in 3 days. The 30th day began at dawn. Layla got up and went down to the shore. She sat on the rocks and looked at the horizon. At 10 in the morning, a dot appeared in the sky. A helicopter. It was approaching quickly. It hovered over the shore and began to descend. Layla got up and walked to the landing pad. Her legs were buckling. The helicopter landed. The door opened. The co-pilot jumped out and held out his hand. Layla took it, and they lifted her on board. The helicopter took off. Layla looked down at the island. 3 bodies were lying somewhere down there. Amira was by the rock. Zainab was by the spring. Fatima was by the cave. They were all dead. She was alive. That meant she had won. The helicopter took Layla to a private clinic in Jeddah. The doctors conducted a full examination. She had lost 18 kilograms in 30 days. Dehydration, exhaustion, multiple abrasions and bruises. Tests showed critically low levels of protein and electrolytes. She was placed in a private room, hooked up to IVs, and started on restorative therapy. The foundation's lawyer visited her on the 3rd day. He brought documents for her to sign. Layla was officially recognized as the sole surviving participant in the experiment. According to Saleh's will, the entire inheritance passed to her. $3.2 billion in assets, 8 villas, 2 yachts, a controlling stake in a petrochemical corporation, an investment portfolio, everything. But there was a condition that Layla had not known about until that moment. The lawyer explained that Saleh had recorded an additional part of the will. The winner must watch the entire 30-day recording on the island in the presence of 50 witnesses chosen by Saleh. This is a mandatory condition for receiving the inheritance. Refusal means that all property will be transferred to a charitable foundation. Layla asked why this was necessary. The lawyer replied that it was Saleh's will. He wanted the winner to see everything that had happened. Every death, every murder, every moment recorded by 900 cameras. And he wanted his 50 friends to see it too. It was part of the punishment he had devised for his wives. The viewing was scheduled for a week after Layla's return. She was discharged from the clinic. She was taken to a private cinema in one of the hotels in Jeddah. The hall had 50 seats. When Layla entered, all the seats were taken. 50 men in traditional white robes sat silently staring at her. Saleh's business partners, friends of the family, influential people. Layla was seated in the front row, center. The lawyer explained that the recording was 8 hours long. It was an edited version, including key moments. There would be no breaks. Layla had to watch it from beginning to end. After that, The inheritance would be officially registered in her name. The lights went out. An aerial view of the island appeared on the screen. Date: September 18th, 6 a.m. A helicopter drops off 4 women. The cameras show their faces: Fatima, Layla, Amira, Zainab, all alive and well. They don't know yet what awaits them. The recording is sped up in places where nothing happens. The main moments are shown: the first days of settling in, the search for water and food, meetings between the women, Zainab and Amira's conversation about an alliance, their joint hunting and fishing, Zainab's attempt to steal food from Fatima, a fight, a stone thrown by Fatima, then a scene on the rocks, the 16th day. Amira climbs up to the nests. The camera shows a close-up of her face. Concentration, caution. Then her foot slips. Fall. The impact with the rocks below is recorded from another angle. The body remains motionless. The camera switches to Zainab below. She runs up. She kneels down beside her. Amira says something, her lips moving. She asks for help. Zainab looks at her. 30 seconds of stillness. Then she bends down, takes the eggs from Amira's bag. She takes a knife, a bottle of water. She stands up. She leaves. The camera remains on Amira's face. Pain, horror, the realization that she has been abandoned. The next 4 hours of agony are shown in fast motion. Amira tries to scream. Then she falls silent. Her breathing becomes shallow. By evening, it stops. The time of death is recorded: 23:32. Layla sat motionless. She stared at the screen. Rare comments from the men could be heard around her. Someone said that Zainab had done the right thing. The weak must die. Someone else condemned her. Others remained silent. The recording continued. Day 20. Layla tracks Zainab to the spring. The camera shows it from 3 angles: ambush, chase, struggle. Layla's hands on Zainab's neck. Pressure, gasping, body twitching. Then a face in the water. 3 minutes of stillness. Death. Layla watched herself on the screen. She saw her face at that moment. Concentration, determination, no regret. She killed methodically, efficiently, like a person who has made a decision and carries it out. The men in the room looked at her with different expressions: admiration, disgust, curiosity. The final scene, the 28th night. Layla approaches Fatima's cave. She moves the rocks. Fatima jumps out. The fight is recorded in infrared light because it was dark. 2 silhouettes struggle on the ground, blows, screams. Then one silhouette on top, hands on the other's neck. Long immobility, death. The recording ended. The lights came on. Layla sat with her back straight, her hands on her knees. Her face was emotionless. 50 men looked at her. The lawyer stood up and announced that the viewing was over. The condition of the will had been fulfilled. The inheritance would be formalized within a week. Layla was taken to one of the villas that now belonged to her. A huge house overlooking the Red Sea. 20 rooms, a swimming pool, a garden, servants. All of this was now hers. She went inside and went up to the master bedroom. She lay down on the bed. She closed her eyes. She didn't sleep all night. The children of the 3 murdered wives filed a class action lawsuit a month later. They accused Layla of murdering their mothers. They demanded that she be stripped of her inheritance and prosecuted. The trial lasted 3 months. Layla's lawyers presented a copy of the will and documents confirming the voluntary consent of all participants. They argued that the women were aware of the risks and had signed a waiver. The court reviewed all the materials. The judge ruled that Layla's actions were part of an agreed game organized by the late Saleh. All participants were of legal age, legally competent, and signed the consent form voluntarily. The deaths of Amira and Zainab were the result of the conditions of the game. No criminal case was opened. The lawsuit was dismissed. The children appealed, but the appeal was rejected by the Supreme Court. The influence of Saleh's family and his friends' connections played a role. The case was closed for good. Layla officially became the richest woman in the country. The press wrote several articles about the billionaire's widow who inherited his fortune. The details of the trial were not published. The family kept the information private. But the recording from the island ended up on the dark web 6 months later. One of the 50 witnesses leaked it. 8 hours of footage spread across closed forums. It became the most viewed content in the real violence category. Millions of views, comments in different languages. People discussed who was right, who was wrong, who should have survived. International human rights organizations demanded an investigation. The UN sent a request to the Saudi government. The Ministry of Justice replied that the case had been reviewed by a national court. All participants acted voluntarily. The country's laws had not been violated. No further action was taken. Layla began to have trouble sleeping 3 months after her return. She woke up in the middle of the night from nightmares. She saw the faces of Zainab and Fatima, their eyes at the moment of death, their hands around her neck. She started taking sleeping pills. Then she increased the dose. The sleeping pills stopped helping. She switched to stronger drugs. Her eldest daughter visited her once a week. She saw how her mother was changing, losing weight, neglecting herself. She would sit for hours in one room, staring out the window. Her daughter suggested psychotherapy. Layla refused. She said everything was fine. She was just tired. A year after her return, Layla took the entire package of sleeping pills at once. She washed them down with whiskey. She lay down on the bed. The maid found her in the morning. An ambulance was called. They pumped her stomach. She was placed in a psychiatric clinic for 2 weeks. After her discharge, Layla announced that she was donating her entire inheritance to a charitable foundation that helps women who are victims of domestic violence. All $3.2 billion. She kept only 1 villa and a monthly allowance for herself. Her children tried to challenge the decision. They said that their mother was in an inadequate state. The court ordered a psychiatric examination. The experts recognized Layla as legally competent. The decision to transfer the property was approved. The money went to the fund. Layla left Saudi Arabia a month later. She moved to Lebanon. She settled in a convent in the mountains near Beirut. She converted to Islam but lived in a Christian convent by agreement with the abbess. She spent her days in prayer and working in the garden. She had almost no contact with anyone. Her daughter visited her once every 6 months. She said that her mother was calm but distant, as if she lived in another world. She did not talk about the past. She did not mention the island. She did not mention the names Amira, Zainab, Fatima. She lived each day as if it were her last. She awaited death as a deliverance. The story became a legend in small circles. It was talked about as the most brutal game of survival in history. Documentaries were made for underground channels. Articles were written in alternative media. But officially, the case remained closed. The Saudi authorities refused to comment. This is the real price of an inheritance obtained through the death of others. The modern world allows rich people to create rules that seem impossible. Technology makes it possible to record every moment. But laws do not always protect the weak when the strong have money and connections. If this story made you think about the limits of free will and the price of consent, like and subscribe to the channel. Every week, we publish investigations that are not covered by the mainstream media. Stories about how money and power work in closed societies. Share this material if you believe that such cases should be known. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next investigation. A 29-year-old Indonesian nurse died 4 hours after tasting her wedding cake at a luxury hotel in Dubai. A lethal dose of poison was found in her blood, and the murder was ordered by 7 heirs of her former patient. Dina Sari arrived in Abu Dhabi in March 2022 on a contract with a private clinic that specialized in palliative care for wealthy patients. She was 27 years old, had graduated from medical school in Jakarta, and had worked at a local hospital for 3 years before deciding to move. The salary in the Emirates was 10 times higher than at home, and Dina planned to save money to help her parents in the village and her younger brother with his education. The clinic was located in a modern building in the city center, served no more than 20 patients at a time, and each of them had their own personal medical staff. Mansour Al-Maktoum was brought to the clinic a week after Dina's arrival. He was 81 years old, and doctors diagnosed him with terminal pancreatic cancer that had metastasized to his liver. Treatment was pointless. The only goal was to ease his pain and provide dignified care during the last months of his life. Mansour built his fortune in the oil industry in the 1970s and 1980s, when the Emirates were experiencing an economic boom. He owned shares in 3 oil companies, a chain of gas stations, and commercial real estate in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. His fortune was estimated at around $800 million. Dina became his primary nurse. Her shift began at 6 a.m. and ended at 10 p.m., 6 days a week. She helped Mansour with his hygiene, fed him when he was too weak to eat on his own, changed his painkiller IVs, checked his vitals, and simply stayed by his side when the pain became unbearable. In the first few weeks, Mansour hardly spoke. He lay staring at the ceiling and only moaned when the pain intensified. Dina spoke to him in simple English, which she had learned for work, telling him about the weather outside, the news, and what was being prepared for breakfast at the clinic. She didn't know if he was listening, but the doctors said that her voice helped patients feel less lonely. Mansour had 7 children from 3 marriages. His eldest son, Ahmed, was 54 and ran one of his father's oil companies. His youngest daughter, Fatima, was 32 and lived in London, where she worked as an interior designer. The other 5 children were between 35 and 48 years old, all of them receiving monthly payments from the family fund and working in various positions in their father's business or running their own projects with his money. Mansour's first wife had died 20 years ago. His second wife had divorced him and moved to Paris, and his third wife, 30 years his junior, had also filed for divorce when she learned of his diagnosis. The children rarely visited their father. Ahmed came once every 2 weeks, stayed for 15 to 20 minutes, asked how he was feeling, and left, citing business matters. The others appeared less frequently, sometimes 3 or 4 at a time, spent 10 minutes in the ward, and returned to their lives. Dina noticed that they hardly spoke to their father directly. They talked to the doctors, asked about the prognosis, how long he had left, but communicated with Mansour himself formally, as if he were a stranger. After their visits, he usually became silent and refused to eat. The turning point came a month after he was admitted to the clinic. Dina was reading Mansour the news in English from her tablet when he suddenly stopped her. He asked her to tell him something about herself instead. Dina was taken aback. She was used to maintaining a professional distance, but there was something so tired and sincere in his voice that she decided to answer. She told him about the village in central Java where she grew up, about her parents who grew rice, about her brother who dreamed of becoming an engineer but couldn't afford university in Jakarta. Mansour listened without interrupting, then said that his father had also been a farmer. He remembered carrying water to the fields as a child and thinking that he would never escape that life. It was the first time he had ever spoken about his past. After that, they began talking every day. Mansour talked about how in the 1950s there was nothing in the Emirates but sand and fishing villages, how at the age of 20 he got a job as a worker on the first oil well, and within 10 years rose to become a manager. He told her how he bought his first share in the company by taking out a loan against his house, and how he nearly went bankrupt during the oil crisis of 1973. Dina listened, and Mansour perked up. He began to eat better, joke around, ask her opinion on the news, and request that she turn on the music. The doctors said his emotional state had improved, although he continued to weaken physically. Dina spent more time with him than her schedule required. She stayed after her shift if she saw that he was lonely, brought him fruit from the local market that he loved, and played Indonesian songs on YouTube so he could hear the music of her homeland. Once she brought photos of her family, and Mansour looked at them for a long time, asking about each one. Then he asked her to write to his brother on his behalf and say that he was willing to pay for his education. Dina refused, saying it was too much, but Mansour insisted. He said he had money, but it was useless if he couldn't help people who really deserved it. Mansour's children noticed these changes. Ahmed once stayed behind after a visit and spoke to the head doctor, expressing concern that the nurse was spending too much time with his father and that it might be inappropriate. The doctor replied that Dina was following all protocols and that her attentiveness was beneficial to the patient. Ahmed did not argue, but asked to be kept informed of any significant changes in his father's condition. A few days later, Mansour's two other children came together and also asked questions about Dina, how often she communicated with their father, and what they talked about. The clinic administration assured them that everything was within normal limits. By summer, Mansour was barely getting out of bed. The pain had intensified, the morphine doses had been increased, and he spent most of his time in a semi-daze. But when Dina came, he tried to be conscious. They talked less, but he held her hand, and it seemed to her that this gave him more peace than the medication. One day in late June, he asked her to bring a notary. He said he wanted to make changes to his will. Diana was frightened and tried to dissuade him, saying that it was none of her business and that his family might misunderstand. Mansour replied that his family had understood everything correctly long ago, that they were only waiting for his death for the money, that over the past year and a half, they had spent less time with him than she had in a single week. The notary arrived 2 days later. He was accompanied by a lawyer who prepared the documents and an independent doctor who was to confirm that Mansour was of sound mind and capable of making decisions. The conversation was recorded on video. Mansour spoke slowly, pausing because of the pain, but clearly and coherently. He stated that he was leaving Dina Sari $45 million and a villa on Saadiyat Island, which was worth about $22 million. The rest of his estate, about $733 million, was to be divided equally among his 7 children. The lawyer asked if he understood the consequences of this decision, and Mansour replied that he understood completely. He said that Dina had given him more dignity and human warmth in recent months than he had received from his own children in the last 20 years, that she deserved this money for her kindness, and he wanted her to be able to live a life without the difficulties he himself had gone through. Dina only learned about the will after it was signed, when the lawyer informed her separately. She was shocked and tried to convince Mansour to change his decision, saying that it would create problems and that his children would not forgive either him or her. Mansour was adamant. He said that this was his last decision as a free man, and that he wanted to die, knowing that at least someone would get real benefit from his fortune, rather than just continuing to spend money on luxuries without thinking about its value. In mid-August 2023, Mansour's condition deteriorated sharply. The doctors warned the family that it was a matter of days. All 7 children came to the clinic and took turns staying there. Ahmed insisted that someone from the family always be in the room when Dina was there. Dina felt their gaze, their tension, but continued to do her job. Mansour was almost never conscious, but when he was, he looked for her, not the children. On August 21st, at 4 in the morning, Mansour died. Ahmed, his 2 sisters, and Dina, who was holding his hand, were there. His death was quiet. He simply stopped breathing. Ahmed called the others, and within half an hour, the whole family had gathered at the clinic. They collected the documents. The doctors issued a death certificate, and the body was taken to the morgue to be prepared for burial, according to Islamic traditions. Dina went home at 6 in the morning. She cried in the taxi. Over the past year and a half, Mansour had become more than just a patient to her. He was a person she sincerely respected and cared for. The reading of the will was scheduled for 3 days after the funeral, as required by law. The family gathered at the law firm's office in downtown Abu Dhabi. Dina was invited there as well, but she didn't understand why. The lawyer began to read the document, and when he reached the clause about the $45 million and the villa for Dina Sari, the room fell completely silent. Then Ahmed stood up so abruptly that his chair fell backward. He slammed his fist on the table and shouted that it was impossible, that his father had been ill and didn't understand what he was doing. The other children also jumped up and spoke at once, accusing Dina of manipulation, of taking advantage of a dying man's weakness. The lawyer tried to calm them down, saying that the will had been drawn up according to all the rules, that there was a video recording confirming Mansour's legal capacity at the time of signing, and a conclusion from an independent doctor. Ahmed demanded a copy of the recording immediately. When it was played, everyone fell silent and watched as their father explained his decision. After watching, Ahmed turned to Dina and said that she would answer for this, that they would not allow some nurse to steal their family's money. Dina tried to explain that she hadn't asked for this, that she had even tried to dissuade Mansour, but no one listened. The younger daughter, Fatima, called her a prostitute who was hunting for a rich old man. The lawyer called security, and the meeting ended in scandal. The next day, Mansour's family filed a lawsuit in Abu Dhabi court, demanding that the will be declared invalid on the grounds of undue influence on an incapacitated person. They claimed that their father was in a state where he was unable to make rational decisions due to pain, medication, and emotional stress. They claimed that Dina deliberately isolated him from his family, manipulated his feelings, and convinced him to leave her a huge sum of money. The lawsuit included testimony from several clinic employees who confirmed that Dina spent an unusual amount of time with Mansour and that there was a noticeable emotional closeness between them that was not typical of a nurse-patient relationship. Dina had to hire a lawyer. The clinic helped her find a law firm that specialized in inheritance disputes. Her case was taken on by 35-year-old Lebanese lawyer Karim Nasser, who worked for an international firm and had experience in similar cases. He said right away that the case would be difficult, that the family would use all their connections and resources, but that the truth was on Dina's side if she did not hide anything important. Dina told him everything as it was. Karim studied the video recording, medical records, and records of the children's visits to the clinic, and concluded that they had a strong case. The trial began in November 2023 and lasted 8 months. The Mansour family's lawyers presented 23 witnesses to the court, including distant relatives, former business partners, and 3 clinic employees who agreed to testify against Dina. The strategy was simple: to portray her as a calculating gold digger who used her professional position to manipulate a dying man. Ahmed was the first to take the stand. He spoke confidently, with undisguised anger. He said that in recent years his father had often lost his mental clarity, forgotten his children's names, and confused dates. When he was admitted to the clinic, he was so exhausted by illness and medication that he was unable to make important decisions. The family had noticed several times that Dina would sit with him alone behind closed doors, and that after such meetings, their father would become distant from his relatives. Karim began his cross-examination with the medical records. He presented documents confirming that Mansour underwent monthly cognitive tests, and the results showed normal brain function until the very last weeks of his life. He presented correspondence between Ahmed and the company's accountant, in which, a month before his father's death, Ahmed discussed the strategy for selling one of the assets after receiving the inheritance. He asked how a son so concerned about his father's health was already planning to dispose of his money. Ahmed said it was just business preparation, but in the courtroom, his words sounded unconvincing. One of the clinic's employees, a nurse named Youssef, who testified in favor of the family, said that Dina often stayed after her shift, and that he heard her talking to Mansour about her financial problems. Karim asked for clarification as to when exactly this was. Youssef gave approximate dates in May 2023. Karim presented timesheets showing that Youssef had not been at work on those days. He then showed Youssef's bank statements, which showed that a week before the trial, $20,000 had been deposited into his account from one of the companies owned by Mansour's family. Youssef was confused and said it was payment for consulting services, but he couldn't explain what kind. The judge reprimanded the plaintiff's lawyers, and Youssef's testimony was deemed questionable. The next witness was Mansour's second wife, Layla, who divorced him 8 years ago and lived in Paris. She flew in especially for the trial, and her testimony was most unexpected. Layla said that she had known Mansour for 30 years and that he had always been cold in relationships, unable to express his feelings. She said she left him precisely because of this emotional emptiness, despite their luxurious lifestyle. But then she said something that changed the mood in the courtroom. She admitted that Mansour once told her that his children were only interested in money. He regretted that he had given them everything too easily, and that they had grown up without understanding the value of work. This was a year before their divorce, and Layla remembered this conversation because it was the first time Mansour had spoken to her candidly about his regrets. The family's lawyers tried to discredit Layla, hinting that she was taking revenge on her ex-husband and his children, but she remained calm. She said she had no interest in the case, that she had received enough in the divorce and was simply telling the truth. That if Mansour had left the money to the nurse who had cared for him in his final days, that was his right, and perhaps it was the only truly honest decision he had made in recent years. By the end of February 2024, it became clear that the family did not have enough evidence. The video recording of the will was convincing. Mansour spoke clearly, answered the lawyer's questions without hesitation, and explained the motives for his decision rationally. Medical records confirmed that at the time of signing, he was not taking any drugs that could seriously affect his consciousness. Dina testified calmly, answered all questions in detail, and did not try to hide anything. She talked about her conversations with Mansour, about what he said about life, about his regrets, about his children. She admitted that she was surprised and frightened when she learned about the will, that she tried to dissuade him, but he was adamant. Karim presented additional evidence that showed the real picture of the family's relationship with Mansour. He obtained records of phone calls from the clinic over the past year and a half. Mansour had called his children 46 times during that period, and 32 of those calls had gone unanswered. When they called back, the conversations lasted an average of 3 to 4 minutes. Visitation logs showed that over 18 months, the children had spent a total of about 20 hours with their father. Dina spent more than 4,000 hours with him during the same period. The judge asked both sides for their closing arguments. The family's lawyer spoke about traditional values, about the fact that inheritance should remain in the family, about the fact that medical workers should not receive material benefits from their proximity to patients. Karim responded that the law protects a person's right to dispose of their property as they see fit, provided they are of sound mind, that no traditions can override this right, that the children had received a huge fortune, $104 million each, and that their claims were based solely on greed, not justice. On July 9, 2024, the court issued its ruling. The will was declared fully valid. In his ruling, the judge stated that all procedural requirements had been met, that Mansour al-Maktoum was of sound mind at the time of signing the document, and that there were insufficient grounds to believe that he had been subjected to undue pressure. Dina was awarded $45 million and a villa on Saadiyat Island. The family had the right to appeal, but their lawyers said the chances of success were minimal. After the ruling was announced, Dina left the courthouse under the gaze of dozens of cameras. The media coverage of the case was moderate, but local newspapers and several international publications wrote about it as a rare example of a medical professional receiving a huge inheritance from a patient. Journalists shouted questions, but Dina did not respond. Karim led her out through a side exit, and they drove away in his car. At that point, there was more than just a professional relationship between them. During the 8 months of the trial, they spent several hours together almost every day. Karim prepared her for her testimony. They met in his office, discussed strategy, and studied documents. Dina told him about her life in Indonesia, about the fear she felt before the trial, about how she felt guilty, even though she had done nothing wrong. Karim listened, reassured her, and told her that she should not be ashamed of the kindness she had shown to a dying man. Gradually, their conversations became more personal. They had dinner after their meetings, walked along the embankment, talked about life, their plans, and what would happen after the trial. Karim grew up in Beirut, studied law at the American University, and moved to the Emirates 10 years ago. He was divorced, had no children, lived alone in an apartment in Dubai, and devoted most of his time to work. He said he had never met anyone who cared so sincerely about other people as Dina did. Her story with Mansour showed him that kindness still exists in a world where most people only think about profit. Dina also felt that Karim was special. He didn't see her as a client or as a woman who had suddenly become rich. He saw her for who she really was, with all her fears and doubts. After winning the court case, they began dating openly. Karim introduced her to his friends, and they went on a weekend trip to Oman, to the mountains, where Dina saw such landscapes for the first time. She laughed more than she had in all her years working in the Emirates. 3 months after the trial ended, in October 2024, Karim proposed to her. They were on the beach in Ras Al Khaimah, watching the sunset, and he took out a diamond ring and said he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. Dina cried as she said yes. She called her parents in Indonesia, and they couldn't believe their ears. Their daughter, who 3 years ago had been earning $300 a month at a hospital in Jakarta, was now rich and about to marry a successful lawyer. But while Dina and Karim were planning their future, Mansour's 7 children gathered in Ahmed's private office in downtown Abu Dhabi. The meeting was secret, with no secretaries or assistants present. Ahmed closed the door and turned on a device that jammed wiretaps. He said that the legal route had not worked, but that did not mean they should give up. The nurse had stolen their money by taking advantage of their father's weakness, and they were entitled to justice. His younger brother Salih, the 40-year-old manager of the family's investment company, asked what he was proposing. Ahmed replied that there were other ways to solve the problem. The conversation lasted 2 hours. They discussed various options. Someone suggested bribing officials and freezing Dina's accounts, but that was too obvious and could lead to a scandal. Someone else suggested hiring people to intimidate her and force her to leave the country, giving up the money. But Ahmed said that she had already received the money in her account, and intimidation would not work. He proposed a radical plan. If Dina died without making a will, her inheritance would legally pass to her closest relatives, that is, her parents in Indonesia, and it would be possible to come to an agreement with them. They were simple villagers who would be frightened by the legal complications and would agree to a settlement for a symbolic amount. Not everyone supported this idea right away. The middle daughter, Amina, said it was too dangerous and that they could end up in prison. But Ahmed insisted. He said that if everything was done correctly, it would look like a natural death or an accident, that they could hire professionals who would leave no traces, that they had enough money and connections to arrange it so that no one would suspect them. Salih supported his brother. He said that Dina did not deserve the money and that their father had been delusional in the last months of his life. That if they didn't stop her now, she would squander their family's fortune, and that would be a betrayal of their father's memory. One by one, the other 5 agreed. Fatima, the youngest daughter, was the last. She was silent for a long time, then said she agreed, but only if it looked like an accident, and if no one in the family was directly involved in carrying it out. Ahmed knew people who could help. Through his driver, who had worked for the family for 20 years and was completely loyal, he contacted a man who had previously handled various sensitive matters for wealthy Emirati families. This man's name was Zayed. He was about 50 years old. He worked as an independent security consultant, but in reality, he dealt with things that were not talked about openly. Zayed agreed to meet in a neutral place, in a cafe on the outskirts of Dubai, where no one knew them. Ahmed arrived alone and explained the situation. Zayed listened without interrupting, then asked about the budget and the timeline. Ahmed said that money was not a problem, but it had to happen before the end of the year. Zayed replied that the cleanest way was to use poison that would mimic a natural cause of death. There are substances that cause cardiac arrest and breakdown in the body so quickly that they are almost impossible to detect in a normal autopsy. The problem is how to get the substance into the victim's body without being noticed. They discussed options for several weeks. Zayed watched Dina, studying her roots, habits, and social circle. He found out that she rarely went to restaurants alone, that she cooked at home or ate with Karim. She had no bad habits, did not smoke, and hardly drank alcohol. It was difficult to poison her food or drinks in her daily life because access to her home was restricted, and there were too many witnesses and cameras in restaurants. Then Zayed learned that Dina was planning a wedding. Karim had booked a banquet hall at the Burj Al Arab Hotel for February 2025, and invitations had already been sent out to 200 guests. It was the perfect opportunity. At the wedding, there would be a cake that would be cut and distributed to the guests. If poison were added to a specific part of the cake, the part that only the bride and groom would eat, it would look like an accident. And if both died, the investigation would be complicated because it would be unclear who the target was. Zayed proposed this plan to Ahmed in December 2024. Ahmed gathered all 7 of them again, and they discussed the details. Fatima asked if the lawyer's death would cause additional problems. Ahmed replied that, on the contrary, it would divert suspicion from them because Karim might have his own enemies, and the investigation would go in a different direction. Saleh supported the idea. The others agreed. They decided to proceed. Zayed began looking for a way to gain access to the cake. He discovered that the wedding cake had been ordered from a prestigious bakery in Dubai that specialized in exclusive orders for wealthy clients. The cake was to be 5 tiers high, decorated with gold elements, and cost $15,000. The bakery had a permanent staff of 8, including the owner, 2 master bakers, and 5 assistants. Zayed spent 3 weeks figuring out which of them might be vulnerable. One of the assistants was a 32-year-old Pakistani named Rashid, who had been working at the bakery for 4 years. Rashid earned $1,200 a month, lived in a worker's dormitory, and sent most of his money to his family in Karachi, where he had a sick mother and 3 younger brothers. Zayed approached him through a mutual acquaintance, introducing himself as a businessman who needed a favor. He offered $200,000 for one simple operation, to add powder to a certain part of the wedding cake. Rashid refused immediately. He said it was illegal and dangerous. Zayed did not insist, but returned a week later with a new offer: $250,000 and a guarantee of safety. He said that the powder would not cause any harm, that it was just a mild laxative for a wedding prank ordered by the groom's friends. Rashid did not believe him, but Zayed was convincing. He showed him the cash, 10 bundles of $25,000 each. He said that Rashid would receive half immediately and half after the job was done. Rashid thought about it for 3 days. $250,000 meant he could buy a house for his family in Karachi, pay for his mother's medical treatment, and educate his brothers. He agreed on the condition that no one would be seriously hurt. Zayed assured him that everything would be fine, that it was just a harmless joke. He handed him a small plastic bag with white powder and explained exactly where to add it. To the top tier of the cake, from which the first piece is cut for the bride and groom, the powder had to be mixed with the cream so that it was evenly distributed only in this part. The other tiers had to remain clean. Rashid received the first half of the money, $125,000 in early February. The wedding was scheduled for February 15th. The cake was to be delivered to the hotel on the morning of that day. Rashid worked on it for 3 days with 2 other pastry chefs. When the last day came, on the evening of February 14th, everyone else went home, and Rashid stayed behind, supposedly to finish the final decorations. He took out the bag of powder and mixed it with the cream for the top tier, as Zayed had explained. His hands were shaking. He knew he was doing something wrong, but he already had the money, and it was too late to back out. On February 15th, 2025, the final preparations for the wedding began at the Burj Al Arab Hotel. Dina and Karim had booked one of the large halls overlooking the Persian Gulf, decorated with white orchids and gold draperies. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 5 in the evening, with the banquet at 7. Dina arrived at the hotel in the morning with her friends, who were helping her get ready. She chose a dress by a Lebanese designer, embroidered with pearls and crystals, costing $80,000. Karim was waiting for her in the next room, with friends who had flown in from Beirut, especially for the wedding. The cake was delivered at 2 in the afternoon. Rashid personally brought it with the owner of the bakery. They placed it on a separate table in the center of the hall and checked that all the tiers were in place and that the decorations had not been damaged during transport. Rashid tried not to look at the cake too closely. He had done what was required of him, received the second part of the money the day before, and now just wanted to leave. But the owner lingered to photograph the cake for the bakery's portfolio, and Rashid was forced to wait. When they finally left, it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Rashid immediately went home, packed his things, and bought a ticket for the evening flight to Karachi. He planned to leave the Emirates for good. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Dina and Karim exchanged vows in front of 200 guests, including Karim's colleagues, Dina's friends from the clinic, and several relatives from both sides. Dina's parents flew in from Indonesia, and her mother cried with happiness. Karim's father, an elderly law professor from Beirut, gave a speech about how true love is tested, not by wealth, but by the ability of 2 people to support each other in difficult times. After the ceremony, the guests moved to the banquet hall, and dinner began. Dina was happy. She danced with Karim, talked to the guests, and thanked everyone for coming to share this day with them. At 7 o'clock in the evening, dinner was served, and at 8:10, the waiters brought champagne for toasts. At 9 o'clock, it was time for the cake. Dina and Karim stood at the table, took a knife together, and cut the top tier to the applause of the guests. The first piece, according to tradition, was for them. They fed each other small pieces, laughing while the guests took pictures. Dina tasted the cream and said it was the best cake she had ever eaten. Karim agreed. The waiters cut the remaining tiers and served the guests. By 11 o'clock in the evening, Dina felt slightly dizzy. She thought it was due to fatigue and the emotions of the day. She asked Karim to take her to the lounge, which had been reserved for them in case they needed to rest before leaving on their honeymoon. Karim noticed that she had turned pale and became concerned. He asked if she needed a doctor, but Dina said she just wanted to sit in silence for 10 minutes. They went into the room. Dina sat down on the sofa, and a minute later, she began to feel nauseous. She went to the bathroom, but the nausea did not go away, and she began to vomit. Karim called the hotel medical staff. While he was waiting, Dina returned from the bathroom, holding onto the wall. Her face was gray, she was breathing heavily, and she complained of chest pain. Karim realized that this was serious and immediately called an ambulance. 5 minutes later, the hotel medic arrived with a first aid kit and measured her blood pressure and pulse. The readings were critical. Her pulse was 140 beats per minute, and her blood pressure was dropping. Dina began to lose consciousness. The medic asked Karim to help lay her on the floor and began to administer first aid. The ambulance arrived at 11:45. The medics immediately hooked her up to oxygen, put her on an IV, and tried to stabilize her condition. One of them asked Karim what Dina had eaten and whether she had any allergies. Karim said she had no allergies and had eaten the same food as all the other guests at the wedding. The medics loaded her onto a stretcher and carried her to the ambulance. Karim sat next to her, holding her hand. Dina was unconscious, breathing through an oxygen mask. On the way to the hospital, her heart stopped. The medics began resuscitation, performing indirect heart massage and using a defibrillator. Her heart started beating for a few seconds, then stopped again. They repeated their attempts all the way to the hospital. The car arrived at Cornish Hospital at 12:20 a.m. Dina was immediately taken to the intensive care unit, but 20 minutes later, the doctors came out and told Karim that they had been unable to save her. The time of death was recorded as 12:43 a.m. on February 16th. Karim was unable to speak. He sat in the hospital corridor in his wedding suit, in shock. Dina's parents arrived half an hour later, and her mother fell to the floor, screaming. The doctors explained that the preliminary diagnosis was acute heart failure, but the exact cause could only be determined after an autopsy. Karim insisted on a full autopsy and toxicological analysis. He told the doctors that Dina had been perfectly healthy, that she had undergone medical examinations several months ago before the wedding, and that all her indicators were normal, that it could not have been a natural death. The autopsy was performed the next day. The pathologist found signs of poisoning. The organs showed damage characteristic of exposure to a toxic substance. Samples of blood, tissue, and stomach contents were sent for toxicological analysis to a specialized laboratory. The results came back 2 weeks later. Dina's blood was found to contain high concentrations of the organophosphate compound thiophosphate, which is used as an insecticide in agriculture, but in large doses causes cardiac arrest in humans. The dose was lethal, approximately 15 times the minimum lethal concentration. The Dubai police launched a murder investigation. Karim gave detailed testimony, recounting the court case with Mansour's family, how they had threatened Dina after losing in court, and how they had a motive. Investigators began checking everyone who had access to food and drinks at the wedding. The hotel provided lists of staff who worked that day and surveillance camera recordings. The catering company provided information about food suppliers. The main question was how the poison got into Dina's body. Analysis showed that it was in her stomach, along with the remains of the cake. The police seized the remains of the cake from the hotel and sent them for examination. Traces of the same substance were found in the top tier, from which the pieces for Dina and Karim had been cut. There was no poison in the other tiers. This meant that the poisoning was deliberate. Someone had added poison to the part of the cake that the bride and groom were supposed to eat. Investigators questioned Karim as to why he was not affected, since he had also eaten from the same piece. It turned out that Karim had eaten a very small piece, literally just a taste, and left the rest on his plate because he didn't like sweets. Dina ate her entire portion. That was enough for a lethal dose. The police questioned all the staff at the bakery. The owner, 2 master confectioners, and 4 assistants gave testimony. All denied involvement. But one of the assistants, Rashid, did not show up for work the day after the wedding. The owner said that Rashid had sent a message on the morning of February 16th, saying that he had to leave urgently for Pakistan due to family circumstances. Investigators checked immigration records. Rashid flew to Karachi on the evening of February 15th, a few hours after the cake was delivered to the hotel. He was placed on Interpol's wanted list. Pakistani police found him in Karachi 4 days later. He was living in a new house that he had bought in his mother's name. During a search, they found $120,000 in cash and bank receipts for another $130,000. Rashid denied everything at first, but when they showed him the results of the cake analysis and explained that he could face the death penalty for murder, he broke down. He confessed that he had added powder to the cake, but said he did not know it was poison. He was told it was a harmless joke and was paid $250,000. He named the person who hired him, Zayed. The Dubai police began searching for Zayed. This proved difficult because he was an experienced professional who covered his tracks. But Rashid described his appearance, the meeting place, and the model of the car. Surveillance cameras in the area of the cafe where they met helped identify the car. The license plate number led to the owner, which turned out to be a car rental company. They looked up the rental documents. The car was rented by a man named Zayed Hamid, with a UAE resident passport. He had several convictions for fraud and extortion in the past, but had not been charged with anything in the last 10 years. He was arrested in Sharjah a week after Rashid's arrest. During a search of his apartment, they found a phone with correspondence that he had not had time to delete. There were messages with a number registered to Ahmed, Mansour's eldest son and driver. The messages were cautious, with no direct references to the crime, but the context was clear. Zayed wrote about the job being done, the delivery, and the result. The driver replied with short confirmations. Zayed realized he had no way out. The investigators offered him a deal: full confession and cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. Zayed agreed. He told them everything: how Ahmed had contacted him through the driver, how they had met several times to discuss the plan, how he had found Rashid and convinced him to put poison in the cake. He named all 7 of Mansour's children as accomplices because he was present at their meeting, where they discussed and approved the plan. He said the meeting took place in Ahmed's private office at the end of December, and he recorded it on a dictaphone because he wanted to have insurance in case something went wrong. The recording was found in a safe in Zayed's apartment. It contained the voices of all 7 children discussing the murder plan. Ahmed said that the legal route had not worked and that they needed to take other action. Salih suggested options. Fatima expressed her concerns, but ultimately agreed. The other 4 also participated in the discussion. The recording lasted 43 minutes and contained enough evidence to charge all those present with conspiracy to commit murder. All 7 of Mansour's children were arrested on the same day, March 2nd, 2025. The operation took place early in the morning, simultaneously in different areas of Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Their lawyers immediately claimed that the recording had been obtained illegally and could not be used as evidence, but the court ruled that the recording was admissible evidence as it had been made by a witness to the crime. In addition, there were telephone records, bank transfers, and the testimonies of Rashid and Zayed, which painted a complete picture of the crime. The trial began in June 2025 and lasted 5 months. The case received enormous attention in the international media. The heirs of an oil magnate who ordered the murder of a nurse over an inheritance made headlines in newspapers around the world. The defense tried to prove that the children did not know about Zayed's real plans, that they only discussed theoretical possibilities of pressuring Dina, but the audio recording was too clear. It directly mentioned death, poison, and that this was the only way to get the money back. The prosecutor presented evidence that all 7 had transferred money to accounts that were ultimately used to pay Zayed and Rashid. The total amount was $300,000. The transfers were disguised as payments for consulting services, but the timing coincided with the period of preparation for the crime. Bank experts traced the chain of transactions and showed that the money went from Mansour's children through several intermediate accounts to Zayed. On November 11, 2025, the court handed down its verdict. Ahmed, as the organizer, received a life sentence without the right to early release. Salih received 25 years for his active participation in the planning. The other 5 children received between 15 and 20 years each, depending on the degree of their involvement. Zayed received 30 years with the possibility of parole after 20 years for good behavior, thanks to a deal with the investigation. Rashid received 25 years. The court ruled that, although he was acting as a hired hand and did not know the victim personally, he knowingly participated in the crime for money and bore full responsibility. Dina's $45 million and villa on Saadiyat Island passed to her parents under inheritance law. They sold the villa and returned to Indonesia. Dina's father established a charitable foundation in her name, which funds education for poor children in Central Java province and provides medical care for rural areas. Her mother was unable to recover from the loss of her daughter. Her health deteriorated, and she died 2 years later of a stroke. Karim quit his job at the law firm. He couldn't continue living in the Emirates, where everything reminded him of Dina. He moved back to Beirut and started working for an organization that protects the rights of migrant workers. In an interview with the BBC a year later, he said that he had lost the love of his life because of money they didn't even need. He said they had planned to give half of their inheritance to charity, build a hospital in Dina's village, and help her family and other people in need. He said Dina was the kindest person he had ever known, and that she was killed for caring for a dying man. He said that a system where children are willing to kill for an inheritance that is already large enough shows how money destroys humanity. That he will remember Dina every day of his life, and that the only thing that gives him the strength to continue is the work he does in her name, helping people like her. The case was closed in December 2025. All those convicted are serving their sentences in prisons in the United Arab Emirates. Appeals have been rejected. The story of an Indonesian nurse who received an inheritance from a patient and was killed at her own wedding by his children became one of the most high-profile crimes of the year in the Persian Gulf region, and a reminder of what greed and a lack of human compassion can lead to. A 30-year-old Filipino crypto trader stole $90 million from an Emirati investor who raped her 19-year-old sister, who worked for him as a maid, 8 years ago, after which the girl became pregnant and eventually committed suicide. For refusing to return the money, she was paralyzed from the neck down by an injection into her spine and left in the desert, while the $90 million remained permanently locked in crypto wallets that she cannot physically access. Cristina Mendoza began working with cryptocurrencies in 2013 when she was 21 years old. She lived in Manila, in the Quezon City area, in a small apartment with her mother and younger sister. After graduating from college with a degree in information technology, she was unable to find a job in her field and took a job as an administrator at an internet cafe. Her salary was $300 a month. In her spare time, she read forums about a new technology called blockchain and a digital currency called Bitcoin. She assembled her first mining computer from used components purchased at the Green Hills Market. She spent $250 on it, which she had saved up for 6 months. The computer stood in her room and ran around the clock. In the first month, she mined 0.17 bitcoins. At that time, 1 bitcoin was worth about $100. It was pocket change, but Cristina understood the potential of the technology. She studied Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper, learned about algorithms, and followed the development of the project. By 2015, she was already running a small farm of 8 video cards located in her neighbor's garage for a fee of $50 a month. Bitcoin had grown to $400, and her savings amounted to about $8,000. She quit her job at the internet cafe and focused entirely on cryptocurrencies. In 2017, when Bitcoin skyrocketed to $20,000, her portfolio reached $240,000. She bought an apartment for her mother and started trading on crypto exchanges. Cristina was self-taught. No one taught her technical analysis or the basics of trading. She watched instructional videos on YouTube, read articles, and analyzed charts for 12 hours a day. Gradually, she developed her own strategy based on reading market sentiment and analyzing trading volumes. By 2020, her portfolio was worth about $700,000. She traded not only Bitcoin, but also altcoins, participated in initial coin offerings, and invested in decentralized finance projects. In small crypto communities, she was known by the nickname Crypto Queen PH. She had a small but loyal audience on Telegram, where she sometimes shared her predictions. She never took money for advice or sold courses. She simply shared her experience. By 2025, her portfolio had reached $3 million. She decided it was time to broaden her horizons. Dubai seemed like a logical choice. The United Arab Emirates was actively developing the crypto industry, creating a favorable regulatory environment and attracting international companies. Dubai was home to the largest crypto exchanges, conferences, and investments. Christina obtained an investor visa, rented an apartment in the Dubai Marina area, and began attending industry events. At a conference at the Dubai World Trade Center in March 2025, she met Ahmed Al-Mansouri. He was 56 years old. He managed a family investment fund with assets valued at $2 billion. The fund invested in real estate, construction, and energy, traditional industries, stable incomes. But Ahmed saw that the world was changing. Cryptocurrencies were no longer a marginal topic. Institutional investors were entering the market. Governments were creating regulatory frameworks, and blockchain technology was being introduced into the banking sector. They met at a panel discussion on the future of decentralized finance. Christina was speaking as an independent expert. Her speech was short but informative. She talked about the technology without unnecessary hype, explained the risks, and described the real opportunities. After the panel, Ahmed approached her, introduced himself, and asked for her business card. A week later, his assistant called her and invited her to a meeting at the fund's office. The office was located in the Burj Khalifa Tower on the 72nd floor. Panoramic windows, a view of the entire city. Ahmed explained that he wanted to diversify the fund's portfolio and enter the crypto industry, but did not understand the technology deeply enough. He needed a consultant to help him understand, create a strategy, and manage assets. He offered a 6-month contract with a salary of $30,000 per month. Christina accepted the offer. The work began with the basics. She explained to Ahmed the principles of blockchain, the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum, and the concept of smart contracts. He was an attentive listener and asked the right questions. After a month, they moved on to the practical side. They created corporate wallets, set up a security system, and started making small investments. First, $100,000 in Bitcoin, then another $200,000 in Ethereum. The market grew, and the profit was 20% in the first 2 months. Ahmed was satisfied. He increased the investment to $1 million, then to $5 million. Christina managed the funds conservatively, without taking unnecessary risks. She kept most of it in large coins and distributed small amounts to promising projects. By the end of the 3rd month, she was managing assets totaling $20 million. She often visited the fund's office, met with Ahmed, and discussed strategy. Sometimes he invited her to business dinners, where she explained the basics of cryptocurrencies to his partners and acquaintances. Emirati businessmen showed interest but were cautious. It was too unfamiliar a field for them. Ahmed, however, trusted Christina. She did not make empty promises, did not promise super profits, and always told the truth about the risks. About 30 people worked in the office: lawyers, financial analysts, accountants. Christina had little contact with them. Her workplace was in a separate office with 3 monitors and a powerful computer. She spent most of her time analyzing the market and monitoring positions. Sometimes Ahmed would come in, sit down next to her, and ask her to show him how she made decisions. He wanted to understand the logic, to learn to see what she saw. One day in late June, as they were discussing a new decentralized exchange project, a young Filipino woman entered the office with a tray of coffee. She placed the cups on the table, bowed, and left. Christina didn't pay much attention to her, but a few minutes later she asked Ahmed who the girl was. He replied that she was one of the domestic workers who were sometimes sent from his residence when the office was short-staffed. That evening, Christina happened to meet the girl in the elevator. They spoke in Tagalog. The girl's name was Maria. She was 23 years old, and she had been working in Ahmed's house for 2 years. She said that the working conditions were good, she was paid regularly, and she was treated normally. Christina asked if she had met other Filipinas in this house before. Maria replied that several workers had come and gone during her time there, but she didn't remember anyone in particular. The next day, Christina was looking through old photos on her phone and came across a picture of her younger sister, Rosa. The photo was taken in 2017, shortly before Rosa left to work in Dubai. She was 19 at the time. She got a job as a domestic worker through an agency. The contract was for 2 years, with a salary of $400 a month. For a Filipino family, that was good money. Rosa was 12 years younger than Christina. She was a cheerful, lively girl. She dreamed of saving money, returning home, and starting a small business. But something went wrong. 8 months after arriving in Dubai, Rosa suddenly returned home. She was 4 months pregnant. She didn't want to talk about what had happened. She withdrew into herself and hardly left her room. Her mother tried to find out who the father of the child was, but Rosa remained silent. 2 weeks after her return, $50,000 from an unknown sender was deposited into the family's account. No explanation, no documents. Christina was too busy with her own affairs at the time, just starting to earn serious money from cryptocurrencies. She assumed that Rosa had gotten into some kind of unpleasant situation. Perhaps her employer had taken advantage of her, and the money was payment for her silence. But she didn't know for sure. Rosa gave birth to a boy, but motherhood did not bring her joy. She fell into a deep depression. She hardly interacted with her child, did not leave the house, and refused the help of a psychologist. In 2021, when the boy was 3 years old, Rosa took a large dose of sleeping pills. She was found in her bed in the morning. There was no note. After her death, Christina tried to find out what had happened in Dubai. She contacted the agency that had found Rosa a job, but they said that the documents had been lost and they couldn't remember any details. Christina suspected that her sister had been raped, but there was no evidence. Rosa never named the man who had ruined her life. The money in the account had been transferred through an offshore company, and it was impossible to trace the sender. Now, working for Ahmed, Christina began to notice details. There were photographs from different countries hanging in his office. In one of them, she saw a house that looked familiar. Another time, when Ahmed was talking on the phone, she heard him mention a recruitment agency for domestic staff from the Philippines. It was the same agency that Rosa had used. Christina began her own investigation. She couldn't ask Ahmed directly about Rosa, as it would have seemed suspicious. Instead, she decided to proceed methodically. First, she needed to make sure that her sister was indeed working in Ahmed's house. The staffing agency was called Golden Homes Services. The office was located in Deira, in the old part of the city. Christina went there on one of her days off. The agency manager, a 50-year-old man named Rajesh, didn't want to say anything at first. He cited client confidentiality. Christina offered him $1,000 in cash for the information. Rajesh looked at the money, thought for a few seconds, and asked her to wait. He returned 10 minutes later with a folder of old documents. The folder contained a contract in the name of Rosa Mendoza. The start date was July 2017. The employer's address matched one of Ahmed's residences in the Emirates Hills area. The contract was standard. The duties of a domestic worker, a salary of $400 a month, room and board at the employer's expense. The contract was terminated early in March 2018. Reason for termination: personal circumstances of the employee. Christina photographed the documents on her phone and asked Rajesh if he remembered this girl. He replied that hundreds of employees had passed through the agency over the past 8 years, and it was impossible to remember them all. But he added that sometimes there were problems. Employers from wealthy families believe they can do whatever they want with their staff. The agency tries to protect its people, but this is not always possible. When it comes to influential families, you have to turn a blind eye to many things. Christina asked if there had been any complaints from Rosa. Rajesh shook his head. He said that if there had been any official complaints, they would have been recorded. But often the girls don't complain. They are afraid of losing their jobs, afraid of deportation, afraid of revenge. Some just keep quiet and endure. Then they leave and try to forget. The next step was to find other workers who had worked in Ahmed's house at the same time. Christina asked Rajesh to give her the contact details of the Filipinas who had worked there between 2017 and 2019. He said he couldn't just hand out personal information. Christina put another $2,000 on the table. Rajesh wrote down 3 names and phone numbers on a piece of paper. The first woman she contacted had already returned to the Philippines and was working as a teacher in the province. She remembered Rosa. She said they had worked together for about 2 months. Rosa was a quiet girl, worked hard, and hardly ever complained. But at some point she became withdrawn and cried a lot. The other workers tried to find out what had happened, but she wouldn't say anything. Then she suddenly left. There were rumors that one of the men in the house had raped her, but no one knew for sure. The second woman had worked as a cook in Ahmed's house for 3 years. She still lived in Dubai and agreed to meet with Christina in a cafe. Her name was Lucia, and she was 48 years old. She said that the atmosphere in the house was tense. Ahmed was often rude to the staff, especially to young girls. His wife lived separately and rarely visited. There were always guests, business partners, and relatives in the house. Lucia remembered Rosa. She said that the girl often looked frightened. Once, Lucia saw Rosa coming out of Ahmed's office with teary eyes. She asked what had happened, but Rosa just shook her head and ran to her room. A few weeks after that incident, Rosa disappeared. Lucia was told that she had quit and gone home. No goodbyes, no explanations. Lucia suspected that something serious had happened, but she didn't ask. In such houses, it is better not to ask unnecessary questions. She had seen other workers who tried to complain or interfere in the family's affairs get fired. They were deported without compensation, sometimes even without being paid their wages for the last few months. The third woman refused to talk. She said she had signed a non-disclosure agreement and didn't want any trouble. She hung up the phone. Christina didn't insist. She already had enough information to understand the situation. Her sister had indeed worked in Ahmed's house. Something had happened between them. Rosa had become pregnant and returned home. The family had received $50,000 for their silence. Now it remained to be seen whether this was an isolated incident or whether Ahmed had a habit of exploiting young workers. Christina began researching public records and social media. She found Ahmed's wife's Instagram profile. The woman lived in a separate villa, traveled frequently, and posted photos from Europe and Asia. They had 3 children, all adults living abroad. The marriage existed formally, but the spouses hardly ever saw each other. In one of her conversations with colleagues at the office, Christina heard talk that Ahmed had had problems with the police in the past. One of the foundation's lawyers mentioned that in 2010, a case had been brought against Ahmed based on a complaint from an Indian worker who accused him of sexual assault. The case was closed after a few weeks. The woman withdrew her statement and left the country. The lawyer spoke of it as an unfortunate misunderstanding that was quickly resolved. Christina realized that her sister was not the only victim. Ahmed systematically used his position and power to avoid consequences. Money, connections, and influence allowed him to close any case. $50,000 was pocket change for him. It was the price he paid for the right to destroy lives. The anger that had been building up in her since her sister's death now had a specific target. She couldn't go to the police. There was no direct evidence. Rosa was dead. Witnesses were afraid to speak, and documents had been destroyed or hidden. Even if she tried to file a report, the case would be closed as quickly as the previous ones. Ahmed was untouchable. His family had owned businesses in the Emirates for 3 generations. He had connections in the government, the police, and the judicial system. But Christina had something the other victims didn't. She had access to his money. She managed the fund's crypto assets, which by then had grown to 120 million. Ahmed trusted her completely. He didn't understand the technology well enough to monitor every transaction. He relied on her honesty and professionalism. Christina decided that the money would be a tool for revenge, not just to steal and disappear. She wanted Ahmed to feel helpless, to understand what it meant to lose what was important to him. For him, money was not just a means to an end. It was an expression of power, status, and influence. Taking away a significant part of his fortune meant hitting him where it hurt. She began planning the operation at the end of August. First, she studied the fund's security system. Crypto assets were stored in 2 types of wallets. Cold wallets contained the bulk of the funds, about 90 million. They were offline, accessible only to Ahmed and the fund's chief financial officer. Hot wallets were used for daily operations, trading, and quick transactions. They contained about $30 million. Christina had full access to the hot wallets and partial access to the cold wallets through a multi-signature system. The multi-signature system required 3 out of 5 signatures to complete large transactions. 5 people had keys: Ahmed, the CFO, the fund's chief lawyer, an external auditor, and Christina. To transfer funds from a cold wallet, the consent of at least 3 of them was required. This was standard security practice for institutional investors. Christina understood that it was impossible to steal money directly from cold wallets. She had to find another way. She began to study cryptocurrency laundering schemes, anonymous services, and technologies for bypassing blockchain analysis. She read forums on the darknet where methods of concealing transactions were discussed. She studied the work of mixers, which mix coins from different users, making it impossible to trace the origin of the funds. The main problem was that the Bitcoin and Ethereum blockchains are public. Every transaction is recorded and available for analysis. Blockchain analytics companies can track the path of coins through dozens and hundreds of wallets. Even if mixers are used, there are methods of de-anonymization through analysis of time patterns and transaction volumes. Christina found the solution in the anonymous cryptocurrency Monero. Unlike Bitcoin, Monero transactions are completely private. A technology called ring signatures hides the sender, the recipient's address, and the transfer amount. Even with full access to the Monero blockchain, it is impossible to determine who sent what to whom. This made Monero the perfect tool for laundering funds. The plan began to take shape. She would create a conversion chain: Bitcoin to Monero, Monero to stablecoins, stablecoins to anonymous wallets registered via VPN and disposable emails. She would use decentralized exchanges that do not require identity verification. She would break a large sum into thousands of small transactions through hundreds of intermediate wallets. By the time the theft was discovered, the money would have passed through so many intermediate points that it would be virtually impossible to trace. But the main problem remained: how to access the funds from cold wallets. She could only steal 30 million from hot wallets. But that wasn't enough. She wanted to take a significant portion to make the blow as painful as possible. The solution came unexpectedly. In mid-September, Ahmed announced that he was planning a major reorganization of the crypto portfolio. He wanted to exit several positions and reallocate funds to new projects. This required moving a significant portion of the assets from cold wallets to hot wallets for transactions. Ahmed asked Christina to prepare a portfolio restructuring plan. Christina saw an opportunity. She proposed a scheme that required transferring $90 million from cold storage to working wallets for subsequent conversion and reinvestment. The process was expected to take several days. The funds would be temporarily held in hot wallets, to which she had full access. Ahmed agreed to the plan. The start date for the operation was set for September 25th. Christina had 3 weeks to finalize the preparations. She created a network of 250 crypto wallets on different blockchains. She used a VPN, the Tor browser, and disposable SIM cards. She registered on 20 decentralized exchanges under fictitious names. She wrote scripts to automate transactions. Everything had to happen as quickly as possible. The less time that passed between the theft and its discovery, the more difficult it would be to stop the transfer of funds. At the same time, she began to prepare her escape. She ordered a fake Indonesian passport through a contact on the darknet for $80,000. The passport was high quality, with a real chip and biometric data. It had her photo, but with a different name. Siti Nurhaliza, 32 years old, citizen of Indonesia. She booked a ticket for a flight from Dubai to Jakarta for the evening of September 25th. She rented an apartment in Jakarta through an anonymous service, paying in cryptocurrency for 3 months in advance. From Indonesia, the plan was to move to South America, Paraguay or Bolivia, countries without extradition treaties with the UAE. There she could live peacefully, obtain new documents, and start a new life. $90 million in cryptocurrency would provide for her for the rest of her life. She could help her mother, provide for her nephew, Rosa's son, and give him the best education and future. On September 23rd, Ahmed announced that he was leaving for Abu Dhabi for a business meeting with representatives of the Emirates Sovereign Wealth Fund. The meeting would last 2 days. He would return on the evening of the 25th. He asked Christina to begin the operation to transfer the funds in his absence. Everything was ready. The CFO and lawyer had already signed the authorization to move the assets. All that remained was to perform the technical operations. On the morning of September 25th, Christina arrived at the office at 6 o'clock. The office was empty, and the security guard was dozing on the first floor. She went to her office, turned on the computers, and checked all the systems. The funds from cold storage had already been transferred to working wallets the previous evening. $120 million in Bitcoin and Ethereum were sitting at addresses to which she had full access. At 7 in the morning, she activated the scripts. The automatic process began. The funds were divided into small parts and sent to intermediate wallets. From there, they were converted to Monero through decentralized exchanges. Monero was sent through a chain of addresses, then converted to stablecoins, and distributed to the final wallets. The whole process took 4 hours, 250 transactions per second. By 11 in the morning, the operation was complete. Christina transferred $90 million. She left the remaining 30 untouched so as not to arouse immediate suspicion. The security system only detected unusual activity at 11:30. Automatic alerts went to the phones of the CFO and Ahmed. But by that time, the money had already passed through 20 intermediate points and been converted into Monero. It was impossible to track. The fund's CFO called Christina at noon. He asked why the system was recording massive transactions that had not been approved. Christina calmly replied that she was implementing the portfolio restructuring plan that had been approved by Ahmed. The director said that all operations should be stopped immediately until the situation was clarified. Christina replied that she had already completed most of the work and that everything had gone according to plan. 20 minutes later, the director called back. His voice was tense. He said he couldn't find the funds in the working wallets. He asked where she had transferred the money. Christina said that everything was documented in the reports, which she would send by email. She hung up the phone. She gathered her personal belongings, left the office, and went to her apartment. She had 5 hours before her flight. She packed a pre-prepared backpack with the bare minimum, took her fake passport and some cash. She deleted all the data from her personal phone and threw away the SIM card. She turned on a new phone with an Indonesian number that she had bought 2 weeks ago. She called a taxi to the airport. Check-in at the airport went smoothly. The immigration officer checked her passport, looked at the photo, and scanned the document. The system did not issue any warnings. Christina proceeded to the departure area. The flight was scheduled to depart at 6:30 p.m. She sat down in a cafe, ordered coffee, and waited. At 5 p.m., Ahmed returned to Dubai from Abu Dhabi. The CFO called him and informed him of the situation. At first, Ahmed did not understand the scale of the problem. He thought there had been a technical glitch or a system error. He arrived at the office and gathered a team of security specialists. They began checking the transactions. By 6 p.m., it became clear that this was not a mistake. $90 million had been transferred through a complex network of wallets and exchanges. The funds had passed through Monero, which made them virtually impossible to trace. Ahmed tried to call Christina. Her phone was turned off. He sent people to her apartment. The apartment was empty. Her belongings had been taken. Ahmed called the fund's head of security. He was a former Dubai police officer named Salem, who had been working for the fund for the past 5 years. Salem immediately realized that Christina had fled. He contacted his contacts at the immigration service and asked them to check whether she had left the country. An hour later, the answer came. There had been no flights registered under the name Christina Mendoza in the last 2 days. This meant that she was either still in the country or had used false documents. Salem requested the surveillance camera footage from Christina's apartment. The cameras recorded her leaving the house at 2:30 p.m. with a backpack. She got into a taxi. They tracked the car to the airport. They requested the camera footage from the terminal. They found her on the footage. She checked in for a flight to Jakarta, but her passport was Indonesian, not Filipino. By that time, the plane had already taken off. Christina was in the air. Ahmed was furious. He had spent years building a reputation as a reliable investor. The loss of $90 million was not just a financial blow. It was a blow to his reputation, to the trust of his partners, to his family's status. News of the theft would quickly spread in the business circles of the Emirates. He would be considered a naive old man who had been deceived by a young Filipina. He couldn't go to the police. An official investigation would mean publicity. The case would be in the media. The fund's investors would start asking uncomfortable questions about the security system. The damage to his reputation would be greater than the financial losses. Ahmed decided to act through private channels. He had connections in the criminal world. Years of working in business had taught him that sometimes problems are solved not through the courts, but through people who work in the shadows. He knew people who specialized in finding fugitives, returning stolen property, and resolving sensitive issues. These people didn't ask unnecessary questions and didn't leave any traces. Ahmed contacted a man named Farouk. Farouk was the coordinator of a network of bounty hunters that operated throughout Asia and the Middle East. His people found debtors, fugitive businessmen, and criminals hiding from justice. They worked quickly, efficiently, and expensively. Ahmed offered $5 million for Christina's capture and the return of the stolen funds. Farouk accepted the order. He had contacts in Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines. Agents at airports, hotels, and police stations. People who, for money, provided information about the movements of foreigners. He started by checking all flights from Dubai to Jakarta on September 25th. He found a flight on which a woman with an Indonesian passport in the name of Siti Nurhaliza had departed. The photo in the passport matched the image of Christina from the Dubai airport surveillance cameras. Farouk's agents in Jakarta began their search. They checked hotels, hostels, and rental apartments. Christina was cautious. She did not register at hotels, did not use credit cards, and did not communicate via social networks. She rented an apartment through an anonymous service and paid with cryptocurrency. She bought food in small shops and paid in cash. She didn't go out unless she had to. But even the most cautious people make mistakes. Christina knew her mother was worried. Before she ran away, she told her mother that she was going on a business trip for several months. She didn't explain the details and asked her not to worry. Her mother wrote her messages every day, asking how she was doing and when she would be back. Christina didn't reply, so as not to leave any digital traces. But 3 weeks after her escape, on October 16th, she couldn't take it anymore. She logged into her old email account at a public library in Jakarta. She just wanted to check if there were any urgent messages from her mother. She spent 2 minutes online, read the letters, and left. She didn't send a single reply, but that was enough. Farouk's agents were tracking all of Christina's known accounts. As soon as she logged into her email, the system recorded her IP address. The library was in the Menteng district, central Jakarta. The agents began monitoring the area. They checked the library's surveillance cameras. They found her on the recording. She left the library at 2:20 p.m. and walked south. For the next 3 days, the agents patrolled the area within a 2-kilometer radius of the library. They checked the faces of passers-by, comparing them to Christina's photo. On October 19th, one of the agents spotted her at the market. She was buying vegetables and fruit. The agent did not detain her on the spot. There were too many witnesses. Instead, he followed her to her apartment. He wrote down the address and passed the information on to the coordinator. That same night, a group of 4 people arrived at the house. They waited for Christina to go out. Early in the morning, she went out to buy bread at a nearby bakery. They grabbed her on an empty street as she was returning. They covered her head with a bag, tied her hands, and pushed her into a van. It all took less than 30 seconds. No one saw. No one intervened. Christina was taken to an industrial area on the outskirts of Jakarta. There she was placed in a container with minimal amenities: a mattress, a bucket, bottles of water. The container was loaded onto a cargo ship bound for Dubai via Singapore. The journey took 12 days. Christina remained in the container the entire time. She was fed twice a day and given water, but was not allowed outside. The ship arrived at a private port in the Emirate of Fujairah on November 3rd. The container was unloaded at night and transported by truck to the desert. The villa was located in the Rub al-Khali Desert, 300 kilometers from Dubai. It was an old residence that Ahmed's family used for hunting. It was an isolated place, with the nearest settlement 50 kilometers away. When the container was opened, Christina was exhausted. 12 days in a confined space, minimal food, heat. She was taken out of the container and brought to the house. Ahmed was waiting for her there. He had flown in by helicopter especially for this meeting. With him were 3 guards and a man in a medical gown. Ahmed sat in a chair and looked at Christina silently for several minutes. Then he asked where the money was. Christina did not answer. He repeated the question. She said she would never return it. Ahmed stood up and came closer. He asked if she understood what he could do to her. Christina looked him in the eyes and said it was for her sister Rosa, for what he had done to her 8 years ago. Ahmed stopped. He stood silently for a few seconds. Then he asked who Rosa was. Christina told him. She explained that Rosa had worked in his house in 2017, that he had raped her, and she had become pregnant, that the family had received $50,000 for their silence, that Rosa had committed suicide 4 years later because she couldn't live with what had happened. Ahmed listened without emotion. When Christina finished, he shrugged. He said he didn't remember this girl. Dozens of Filipinas had worked in his homes over the years. If anything had happened, it didn't matter. The money had been paid. The case was closed. Christina had no right to steal 90 million from him because of some maid he didn't even remember. He asked again where the passwords for the crypto wallets were. Christina refused to answer. Ahmed nodded to the guards. They tied her to a chair. The next 3 days were spent in continuous interrogation. Ahmed came twice a day and asked the same questions. Between his visits, the guards used pressure tactics. They didn't let her sleep, poured water into her nose and mouth, and used a stun gun. Christina lost consciousness several times, but when she came to, she repeated the same thing. The money would never be returned. On the 4th day, Ahmed made a decision. He realized that Christina would not break. She was ready to die, but she would not give up access to the funds. He could kill her, but that would not bring the money back. 90 million was lost forever, but he could punish her so that she would regret not dying. Ahmed ordered a man in a medical gown to be brought in. He was a military surgeon named Kamal, who had previously served in the armed forces and now worked for private clients. Kamal brought a case with medical equipment. Inside were syringes, ampules with drugs, and surgical instruments. Ahmed explained to Christina what was about to happen. He said that she wanted to destroy his life, to take away what was important to him. Now he would take away what made her human. The ability to move, to work, to live independently. She would remain alive, but it would be an existence, not a life. Kamal injected Christina's spine at the level of the fourth cervical vertebra. The drug was a neurotoxin that destroyed the nerve connections between the brain and the body. The process was irreversible. After a few hours, numbness began in her arms and legs. By the next morning, Christina could not move her arms or legs. The paralysis spread from her neck down. She could feel her body, but she could not control it. Ahmed ordered her to be taken to the desert and left near the road where Bedouins pass in the morning. She was laid in the shade under a tree with a bottle of water left nearby. 3 hours later, she was found by locals who were transporting goods to the nearest town. An ambulance was called. Christina was taken to Fujairah Hospital. The doctors did not understand what had happened. The paralysis was complete and irreversible, but the cause was unclear. The tests showed nothing unusual. Christina was conscious and able to speak, but she could not move anything below her neck. She told the police that she had been kidnapped in Jakarta, held in a container, brought to the UAE, tortured, and given an injection. The police began an investigation, but quickly reached a dead end. There was no evidence of kidnapping. Surveillance cameras in Jakarta did not record anything suspicious. The ship on which she was allegedly transported could not be identified. The villa in the desert belonged to an offshore company that had no direct connection to Ahmed. His alibi was flawless. On the days of the alleged torture, he was in Abu Dhabi for business meetings, which was confirmed by documents and witnesses. Christina was deported to the Philippines a month after she was found. She was placed in a state hospice in Manila, where she is under constant supervision by nurses. Her mother visits her every day. Her nephew, now 7 years old, does not understand why his aunt cannot move. $90 million remain in Christina's crypto wallets. She remembers all the passwords and can dictate them, but she is physically unable to enter them into a computer or phone. The money is frozen forever. Ahmed did not get it back. Christina cannot use it. It simply exists in digital space, inaccessible to both parties. That's all, friends. This is the real price of revenge in the modern world. Technology provides new opportunities, but old methods of violence still work. If this story made you think about the limits of justice and the consequences of choices, like and subscribe to the channel. Every other day, we tell stories that don't make the news. Investigations, documents, evidence. No embellishments, just facts. Share this material if you think such stories should be known. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next investigation. Your attention to these topics is important. On the orders of one of Saudi Arabia's most influential princes, 5 members of his own family, including his granddaughter, her parents, and her 2 brothers, were executed by gunshot to the head in the basement of a private villa. Their crime was not related to politics or treason. It was related to an account on the OnlyFans platform. This investigation begins with a woman known online as Desert Rose 88, or Desert Rose 88. In real life, her name was Noura. She was 26 years old, and she was the granddaughter of the very prince whose influence in the kingdom was almost absolute. To the outside world, Noura's life was an example of conservative devotion. She was part of a dynasty that defined the moral and religious foundations of the country. Her public image was carefully crafted. She wore the prescribed abaya and hijab, never appeared in public without a male guardian or a group of trusted women, and regularly performed all visible religious duties. Her life, at least on the surface, was strictly regulated by the protocols, traditions, and expectations placed on a Saudi woman of her status. She was, in essence, an exhibit of her family's piety. However, beneath this facade lay a second, carefully orchestrated reality. For 3 years, Noura had been running a secret operation that was a direct challenge to everything her family stood for. This operation was centered in a secret apartment in Jeddah, a coastal city known for its slightly more liberal atmosphere compared to Riyadh, but still under strict control. The apartment was rented through a front man, a foreign worker who was paid a substantial sum to lend his name to the lease and to keep quiet. Noura used the apartment as her studio and refuge. The logistics of her double life were complex. She would leave the family compound under the pretext of attending women's charity events, meeting friends, or attending religious classes, all acceptable reasons for her absence that did not arouse suspicion among her guards, who often waited for her outside. It was in this apartment that Noura became Desert Rose 88. Using complex virtual private network software known as VPN, routing her internet connection through several countries to hide her true location, she logged on to the OnlyFans platform. This is a subscription-based service known primarily for adult content. Noura never showed her face. Anonymity was her top priority. Her content consisted of photos and videos in which she wore revealing outfits, lingerie, and costumes that contrasted sharply with her public image. She created the image of a forbidden princess, playing on her subscribers' fantasies about the secret lives of women in a conservative kingdom. This strategy proved to be extremely successful. Her account had 8,500 subscribers from around the world, each of whom paid a monthly fee to access her content. In addition to subscriptions, she earned significant income from selling exclusive, custom-made content for an additional fee. In total, this brought her between $40,000 and $60,000 a month. The money never went into a Saudi bank account. It was processed through international payment systems and immediately converted into cryptocurrency, mainly Bitcoin and Ethereum. Over 3 years, she accumulated the equivalent of $1.8 million in a secure hardware crypto wallet, a small device similar to a flash drive that she kept hidden. This money was not just for luxury, it was her escape plan. Noura used part of her income to finance secret trips to Dubai and Bahrain, often under the pretext of wellness retreats or family reunions. On these trips, she briefly lived the life she longed for, going to nightclubs, drinking alcohol, and socializing with men, living like a typical Western girl. But the main goal of her savings was complete emancipation. Noura hated the restrictions on her life and planned to escape to the West. The money she saved was intended to buy her a new identity, obtain a residence permit through investment programs, and start a new life in London or Los Angeles. For 3 years, her security system worked flawlessly. She was confident that her precautions, not showing her face on video, using VPNs, cryptocurrency, made her invisible. She didn't take into account just one variable, the obsession of one of her 8,500 subscribers. One of those followers was a 34-year-old Saudi hacker named Faisal. He was no ordinary user. Faisal held a position in the government's cybersecurity department, working to identify and neutralize digital threats to the state. His professional life was dedicated to maintaining digital order in the kingdom. However, in his personal life, he was obsessed with Desert Rose 88, spending thousands of dollars of his salary on her exclusive content and paid private messages. For Faisal, it was more than just a hobby. It became an obsession. He was both fascinated and outraged by the existence of a Saudi woman who so openly defied all norms. This obsession soon grew from simple content consumption to a private investigation. Using his professional skills, Faisal began a systematic analysis of every video and photo Noura posted. He searched for digital fingerprints. He downloaded high-resolution videos and studied them frame by frame, ignoring Noura in the foreground and focusing exclusively on the background. He analyzed the reflections in her eyes and looked for glare on glossy surfaces. The first clues were minor, but important. He noticed a specific pattern of ceramic tiles on the floor in one of the videos, which was popular in expensive new buildings in Jeddah in the mid-2000s. He then identified the electrical outlets. They were Type G, the British standard used in Saudi Arabia, confirming her location in the country, contrary to her statements in chats with subscribers that she was a Saudi girl living in Europe. The most important piece of audio evidence that Noura was unable to filter out was sound. In several videos, apparently filmed at different times of the day, very quiet, barely discernible echoes of the call to prayer, known as the adhan, could be heard in the background. Faisal isolated these sound fragments and analyzed them. The acoustics and timing of the calls led him to conclude that she was in a densely populated urban area, probably near a large mosque. Over the course of 6 months, Faisal methodically collected these fragments of data. He cross-referenced architectural styles, soundscapes, and even the type of air conditioner that was visible outside the window in one short clip. He narrowed his search to a specific upscale neighborhood in Jeddah. Then Noura made her fateful mistake. In one of the videos, filmed in daylight, she apparently forgot about her surroundings. She walked over to the window to adjust the curtain, and for a few seconds, the camera captured the view outside. For most subscribers, it was just a view of the city. For Faisal, it was a key clue. He immediately recognized the distinctive outline of the Red Sea Mall and the spire of a well-known mosque visible at a certain angle. Using satellite maps and 3D city modeling software, Faisal triangulated her location. The view from the window could only come from one specific residential skyscraper. He identified the exact building. The next day, Faisal took a day off from work, citing family circumstances. He drove to Jeddah and began surveilling the building. He sat in his car for almost a week, comparing the time when the Desert Rose 88 account usually posted new content with the time people entered and left the building. On the 7th day, he saw her. A woman wearing a full abaya and niqab, completely concealing her identity, entered the building using an access code. She matched the physical characteristics he had deduced from the video, but he needed confirmation. Faisal moved on to the second stage of his plan. He knew that there were public Wi-Fi networks in the building's lobby and in a nearby cafe. He installed an intermediate interception device, disguised as a regular power adapter, in the cafe, where he had noticed her sometimes buying coffee. The next time Noura connected to the public network, her traffic was redirected through Faisal's device. He didn't try to hack into her encrypted banking data. He was looking for something else. He planted an exploit on her phone that gave him access to her photo gallery. What he found exceeded his expectations. Dozens of photos without a hijab, selfies, photos from her secret trips to Dubai. Now he needed the last piece of the puzzle, her real name. He scanned her browser cache and found traces of logins to official government portals, which she had apparently used on the same device. He compared this with official, publicly available photos from the royal family's social media accounts, group photos from charity events and official receptions, and ran a comparison using facial recognition software. The match was 98%. Desert Rose 88 was Princess Noura. Faisal, by his own later admissions on the darknet, was shocked. It was one thing to expose an ordinary woman, but quite another to expose a member of the royal family. He was faced with a choice. He could blackmail her. Given her status, she would probably pay millions for his silence, and he had proof of her crypto wallets. The second option was to report her to the authorities. In Saudi Arabia, there is a system of rewards, both official and unofficial, for exposing immorality that threatens public order. Faisal struggled with this decision for several days, but in the end, it was not greed that determined his choice, but what he considered to be piety. His religious fanaticism and sense of outrage that a woman of such rank could so disgrace the nation outweighed his desire for personal gain. He considered her actions a direct threat to the moral fabric of society. Faisal prepared a comprehensive file, screenshots from OnlyFans, photos from her phone, location data, an analysis of her income, and irrefutable proof of her identity. He did not go to the regular police. He anonymously sent the entire package of evidence directly to the Committee for the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice, the religious police, known as the Mutawa. The package of data sent by Faisal had an immediate effect. The Committee for the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice, having received evidence of this magnitude concerning a member of the royal family, bypassed standard police protocols. A special task force was formed. Acting with exceptional speed and complete secrecy, they obtained a warrant to raid the apartment in Jeddah. They arrived just as Noura was in the process of filming. The arrest was made immediately. She did not resist. The operatives caught her off guard. The apartment was thoroughly searched. Investigators found irrefutable evidence: professional studio lighting, several high-resolution digital cameras, tripods, microphones, and an extensive wardrobe consisting of dozens of revealing outfits, wigs, and underwear. Laptops, external hard drives, and her phone were confiscated. Noura was taken not to a regular police station, but to a secure, undisclosed facility, controlled by the religious police. She was interrogated for the next 48 hours. She was denied access to a lawyer or her family. At first, she denied the allegations, but when confronted with irrefutable evidence, screenshots of her account, photos of her face from her own phone, and location data, she confessed. Under pressure, she also revealed the existence of her hardware crypto wallet and provided the access passwords. The sum of $1.8 million in cryptocurrency was immediately confiscated and transferred to an account controlled by the authorities. Information about this arrest was not passed on to the regular court system. Given Noura's identity and her direct relationship to one of the most influential branches of the royal dynasty, the case was immediately escalated. It was transferred from Mutawa's jurisdiction to the Internal Security Service of the royal court. A full report, containing all the details of her 3 years of activity on OnlyFans, transcripts of interrogations, and confirmation of the seized funds, was delivered directly to her grandfather, the prince, whose word carried the weight of law in many circles. For him, this was not just a crime committed by his granddaughter. In his value system, based on strict tribal codes and a Wahhabi interpretation of Islam, it was the worst possible stain. Public disgrace brought upon the honor of the entire dynasty. In this closed environment, collective responsibility is absolute. The shame of one family member inevitably falls on all. The prince immediately convened an emergency family council. It was not a formal court hearing, but a private meeting held in his personal palace. 12 senior members of the family, her uncles, great-uncles, and other influential relatives, were summoned. The evidence was presented. The discussion, according to a source who later leaked the information, was brief and emotionless. The decision was unanimous. Noura must be executed. This was considered the only way to wash away the shame and restore the family's honor. However, the council did not stop there. The question of the guilt of her immediate relatives was raised. Noura's 52-year-old father and 48-year-old mother were found guilty of criminal negligence. The council ruled that as parents, they had failed to keep track of her and had not been able to instill proper moral values in her, thereby allowing her to go down this path. Their failure to supervise her was considered complicity in the disgrace. Attention then turned to her 2 younger brothers, aged 19 and 22. It was decided that, living in the same house, They could not have been unaware of their sister's behavior, her unexplained absences, her secret trips, and her sudden wealth, which she probably did not take great pains to hide from them. Their silence was considered complicity. The order was given by the grandfather prince. This was not a state execution, which would have required a trial and official protocol. It was a family execution. By order of the prince, the execution was organized in a private villa, located in a secluded spot in the desert, far from prying eyes. Only family members who had participated in the council were present at the villa as witnesses, along with several members of the prince's personal security detail who were tasked with carrying out the execution. 5 family members, Noura, her father, her mother, and her 2 brothers, were taken to the basement of the villa. There they were executed with shots to the head. The procedure was quick and methodical. Immediately afterwards, the bodies were burned on the villa grounds and the ashes scattered in the desert. No traces remained, no bodies to bury. Officially, this branch of the family simply disappeared. In the upper echelons of Riyadh, the rumor spread that they had moved to Europe for an extended period for personal reasons. Their assets and property were quietly absorbed and redistributed within the family. For a year, the secret was kept flawlessly. However, a year later, one of the 12 princes who had been present at the council and witnessed the execution apparently could not bear the burden of his conscience. He anonymously contacted a journalist from the Western publication The Guardian and told him the whole story. The publication caused an international scandal. Human rights groups demanded answers. Saudi Arabian officials immediately and categorically denied the entire story, calling it malicious slander and part of a broader campaign to destabilize the kingdom. With no bodies, no official records of the arrest, and no source willing to speak publicly, the investigation reached a dead end. The OnlyFans account Desert Rose 88 still exists. It is simply frozen, with the last post dated the day of her arrest. Thousands of her subscribers, unaware of her true identity or fate, continued to write comments for several months, asking where she had disappeared to.